get called back to order, and we're going to let Melissa take over and introduce.
Mr. Trey, Trey joined the government in 2013 and serves as Associate Professor of Public Law and Government. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Pembroke and has a law degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He was previously an attorney at Farrington Smith LLP in Raleigh, and prior to that, he served as the law clerk for Justice Paul M. Newby of North Carolina Supreme Court and as a judge advocate in the United States Marine Corps. Trey does a lot for the Clerks Association. I'd just like to say thank you for coming today and helping us out.
Thanks for coming, Trey.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for letting me spend time with you today. I'm going to talk about board procedures. I'm down for an hour. I could talk for 3, but I'll try to talk for less than an hour, if you don't mind.
Yeah, because we just went through ethics training this morning. I don't think it was.
I invite you, I hope you will ask questions at any point that you have them. I'm going to start with a quiz. Now, I'm going to be talking, these questions I'm going to be asking you about what the general rules are, your understanding of the general rules. On some of these things, you may have a different local practice, but just think about what your general understanding is. And of course, there's no penalty for wrong answers. So these are all true or false. True or false? All motions require a second.
True.
You're true? Anybody else? True?
True.
Okay.
Unless you say otherwise.
I'm going to say false to that. Number 2, and of course I'm going to explain as we go through this why I'm saying what I'm saying. Number 2, a member must be recognized by the presiding officer to offer a motion. True or false?
True. That's true.
That's true. There's one exception that I'll mention unless I forget it. Number 3, a member who speaks without recognition may be ruled out of order. True or false?
True.
That's true. Number 4, only one item of business may be discussed at a time.
True.
That's true. Number 5, any member can add an item to the agenda during the meeting without board approval. True or false?
False.
I say that's false. Now, it sounds to me like you did pretty well. I didn't keep track of what you did individually, but I can tell you that I made an A+. So I'm good. All right. I think it's useful when you consider parliamentary procedure to think about the purposes, because oftentimes when there's an issue, even if you can't remember the specific rule, if you keep the foundations of parliamentary procedure in mind, you can usually reason your way to the right answer. And the first purpose of parliamentary procedure is to allow the will of the majority to be determined in an orderly and efficient manner. We don't think about it usually, but it's very important to our system that we have this concept that we identify the will of the deliberative body with the will of the majority. It doesn't have to be that way, right? We could say we require unanimity for everything. I mean, that's what we could have done that. Now, why haven't we done that? Oh, and by the way, I ask questions, so.
Too hard.
Why haven't we done that?
Chaos.
Well, chaos, also what else? How hard is it sometimes to get unanimity? It can be very difficult, right? And so, but there are examples. You can look out in the world and find examples of bodies that require unanimity. Did anybody here follow Brexit? You know, the United Kingdom leaving the European Union? Was part of that, they've had to negotiate an agreement. Now, How many European member states have to approve that agreement? Or had to approve that agreement? All of them. It's a unanimity requirement. So you can definitely find examples. But here in the United States, we've always taken the rule, or generally have taken the rule, that the will of the majority is to be considered the will of the deliberative body. And that's primarily so that we can get things done. Oops. The second reason, though, is to protect the rights of minorities, because we've also valued throughout the history of representative government in this country the idea that members, even when they're on the losing side, still have the right to be heard, still have the right to have notice, and so that's another important reason for parliamentary procedure. Do you have to have a set of rules for your meetings?
I would say yes.
What's that?
I would say yes.
You might say, well, we certainly need it, right?
Yes.
We need it in order to function efficiently, not have chaos. But actually, you don't necessarily have to have a set of rules. The relevant statute authorizes city councils to adopt rules as long as they're consistent with your charter and state law and generally accepted principles of parliamentary procedure. But you don't have to adopt rules. You could just show up and not have an agenda. You could do that. Almost nobody does that for obvious reasons, but that is a reality. If you're going to have rules, as most places do, what are their sources? Well, the most important source of rules for city councils is the general statutes, because obviously you're bound by whatever procedural requirements the legislature imposes. Cities can do only those things that they're authorized to do by the state, right? By the General Assembly. So when the General Assembly gives you a statutory procedural command, you've got to follow it. And the big example of that, or the biggest example of that concerns your meetings, is the open meetings law. It imposes notice requirements that have to be satisfied for a meeting to be lawful. Obviously, your charter, and certainly in your case, I've looked at some of the procedural provisions in your charter. The charter was adopted by the General Assembly. So it's not a general statute, it's a local act, but it is state law in that it was adopted by the General Assembly. Also, case law is an important source of procedural requirements. We'll talk in a few minutes about the quorum statute for city councils. There's also a quorum statute for boards of county commissioners. You might be surprised to learn there's no quorum statute for school boards. You can look, the primary laws for school boards are in Chapter 115C. You can look all through there, and you won't find a statute that tells you how to calculate the quorum for a school board. So how do we know how to calculate a quorum? Well, there was a case in the 1950s. It was a lawsuit that was brought by some folks who were unhappy with a decision by the school board in Yancey County to close certain high schools. So they sued. And one of their arguments was that the board had lacked a quorum in making that decision, and therefore the decision was invalid. And so to decide that, the state Supreme Court had to say what constitutes a quorum of the school board, and so it did. And to this day, that's where the rule for the quorum of a school board comes from. The General Assembly's never followed up by passing a statute. So that's all a matter of case law. And that sort of gets to how do these cases come up? How do we get these procedural rules from the courts? They come up when people are unhappy about something that the city council or the board of county commissioners or the school board has done, and they sue. And they try to argue that, or they argue that the action was invalid because of certain procedural deficits. And the court has to rule on those. Also, local rules, you have local rules, right? Have you adopted local rules, local procedural rules?
Our charter says that we'll follow Robert's Rules of Order.
Excuse me.
Or our code of
sometimes go to places or when I teach procedures, I'll ask, I'll say, raise your hand if your board follows Robert's Rules of Order. And there will always be, so if I were to ask that, you might raise your hand. And what I would say usually is, no, you don't. You think you do, or you aspire to, but trust me when I tell you, you don't. Have you seen the current edition of Roberts? Here it is. It's 700 pages. Okay? Believe me when I tell you, you don't follow it. All right? And why is it so big? It wasn't written for you. Robert's Rules of Order is really aimed at large bodies, conventions, huge meetings, where there is a need for complicated procedures because of the size of the body and the kind of business that they undertake. It wasn't written for small boards. And so that's why if you look in the suggested rules that the School of Government has for city councils, you'll see that there is a rule about that talks about consulting Roberts, but that's what it talks about, consulting Roberts. You don't want to say you're bound by Roberts. You don't want to say you're bound by Roberts. You can say that you're going to consult it, but you don't want to say you're bound by it because it is a complicated book that, again, was not written for small bodies. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question? Can
Sure.
you expound on what Dillon's rule is for North Carolina as far as it overruling any local municipality as far as the state having the power to overthrow a statute or anything?
So Dillon's rule is not really a rule of procedure. It's a rule of interpretation that was applied by our courts. And what Dillon's rule, it's named after a judge who wrote a treatise on municipal law. He was from Ohio. Not that that matters. But Dillon's rule says essentially that local governments can only do those acts that they have express or implied authority to undertake. Okay? And so in applying Dillon's rule, the way it would work is a court, if there were a challenge to some action taken by a local government, the local government would have to say, well, our authority to do this is this statute or this local act. The court would look at it, and if it weren't clear to the court, or wasn't clear to the court, rather, that local act or that statute gave the local government the authority, the court would rule for the person challenging the action. In other words, under Dillon's rule, any doubt about whether the local government had the authority to act in the way that was challenged would be resolved against the local government. If you look at Chapter 160A, those are the general statutes, the primary general statutes for cities. There's a statute in there that says that grants of authority to cities under the general statutes and in charters are to be broadly interpreted. So that was adopted in 1971, apparently an attempt by the legislature to say, we're not following Dillon's rule anymore in this state. So that's Dillon's rule in a nutshell. Did I answer your question? Okay. Now, there's a whole history there about how the state Supreme Court has continued to construe statutes that give authority to local governments after that statute, that broad construction statute that I mentioned. And some people say, well, we're still in some ways basically a Dillon's rule state, even though the General Assembly has said we shouldn't be anymore.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so the fallback resources, Roberts, the suggested rules, those are things you can consult when an issue comes up that your rules don't cover. That's usually when people consult those. Okay, I keep forgetting that I'm pressing the wrong button, so I'll get it. There's 7 basic principles that we're going to briefly mention for parliamentary procedure. One is that obviously your authority as a council is defined and limited by state law. You can only do what the General Assembly's authorized you to do. You have to act as a body. Individual members don't have any authority except to the extent that there's a specific statutory delegation or that the council has delegated them authority. You have to have a quorum in order to conduct business. Every member has an equal right to participate. You have to have an opportunity for debate. If you don't have an opportunity for debate, you're not a deliberative body. You have to act by majority vote, and what that means depends on the circumstances. And the last one, which I hope is true for your council, is that your meetings should be characterized by fairness and good faith. Okay, with those principles in mind, we're going to briefly turn to 7 common problem areas involving board procedures. The first being the agenda. And the first point is the central one. The agenda ultimately belongs to the council. It doesn't belong to the mayor. It doesn't belong to the manager. It doesn't belong to the clerk. It's the council's meeting. And so it reserves the authority to decide what business it's going to take up or what business it's not going to take up. It's perfectly fine and often advantageous to delegate the authority to prepare a preliminary agenda to a staff member or to the mayor. But again, it's ultimately the council's agenda, and that means that the council has the authority to amend that agenda if it so chooses. The only time when that authority is restricted is when there's some kind of statutory impediment. So if you're at a special meeting and you want to add something to the agenda that was not listed in the public notice, that may not be a good idea because you could risk violating the open meetings law. You can't, at the last minute, add and act on a proposed zoning ordinance amendment, right? Because there's statutory provisions that say you have to provide published notice and a public hearing requirement. But other than restrictions of that sort, there really are no restrictions on what the council can decide to take up or put down at a meeting. And so sometimes, I think that's a point that clerks, not your clerk, I'm sure, but that clerks don't want me to emphasize because they like to have the agenda set and everything running smoothly. But again, the agenda, the key point, the agenda is the council's agenda. Any questions about that? All right, quorum. If you understand what I'm about to say about quorum, you'll be far ahead of most people when they, you'll be far ahead of the understanding most people bring to parliamentary procedure. Quorum is not about the number of members who vote on a particular matter. It's about the number of members who have to be present for action to be taken. The usual rule in parliamentary procedure is that a quorum is a majority of the membership, more than half of the total seats. Now here I'm not talking specifically about city councils, but about deliberative bodies in general. What about vacancies? Suppose you have an appointed board that has 7 members. What would a quorum be for that board? 4, right? A majority of 7. Now suppose 2 of those members resign. What would a quorum be for that board?
3.
It might be 3. It depends on whether you count the vacant seats, right? Would you believe that in 700 pages, Roberts doesn't address this issue? So that means primarily it's going to be, in the case of appointed boards, a matter of local discretion. I'll come back to that point in a moment. There is a quorum statute for city councils. It's GS 168-74. And it gives us a formula. And this is the formula. You take vacant seats, you add the mayor. It doesn't matter whether the mayor votes on all questions or only in the event of a tie. You subtract vacant seats, and that gives you X, and a quorum is more than half of X. So just to give you an example, if you had a 5-member council, you would add the mayor, a quorum would be 4. Now suppose you had that same council, but you had a vacancy, you'd subtract the vacancy, that would give you 5, and so in that case, the quorum would be 3. So in other words, under the quorum statute, vacancies can reduce the number of members who have to be present in order for you to have a quorum. Your charter has a quorum provision that says the quorum consists of a majority of your council members and the mayor. I don't believe that it mentions vacancies. I would say, for some reasons that I won't bore you with now, that you should probably follow the quorum statute in dealing with vacancies when it comes to your quorum calculations. Any questions about that? What's more exciting than that? Not much, right? All right, so what if a member steps out of a meeting? How does that affect a quorum? Suppose it's a 7-member board, you've got 4 members present, 1 member walks out to, now I have a smoking area, but sign up there, but fewer and fewer people smoke, so the member steps out to make a phone call. Do you still have, under the general rules of parliamentary procedure, would you still have a quorum?
Yes.
Absolutely.
You would not.
Really?
You would not. Because you had the bare minimum, or you had the minimum number needed for a quorum, so if somebody steps out, you don't have a quorum. That's how it generally works under parliamentary procedure. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, wait a minute, a quorum once established is presumed to continue under Roberts. Was anybody thinking that?
Well, I was always thinking the members, unless we excuse them.
Okay, well, I'm not talking about the council yet. I'm talking about generally, as a general matter of parliamentary procedure. The general rule is, yes, once established, a quorum is presumed to continue, but that doesn't apply when the presiding officer sees that there's no longer a quorum, or when the lack of a quorum is brought to the presiding officer's attention. And if you've only got 4 people in the room, and that's the minimum number needed for a quorum, the presiding officer is going to know when somebody walks out that you don't have a quorum anymore, right? Okay, so that's the general rule. But by statute, for city councils, the General Assembly has altered that rule, and that alteration is reflected in your charter. And it says that if a member steps out without being excused, the member still counts as what?
Yes.
As present. We're not talking about voting, we're talking about quorum. The member still counts as present for quorum purposes. Now, why would the General Assembly do that? Do you think?
You'd have to end the meeting if you lost a quorum, wouldn't you?
So by doing that, the General Assembly takes away the power that a single member might otherwise have to stop business from being conducted, right? All right, now who has to do the excusing?
The council.
Presiding officer.
The presiding officer cannot do it. By statute and under your charter, a member who wants to be excused has to be excused by majority vote of the remaining members present. So that you have to take a vote. If you don't take a vote, the person is not excused and still counts as present for quorum purposes. Now, I'm not talking about voting. We'll talk about voting in a minute. You have to keep those separate because otherwise it gets confusing. So if you step out and you're not excused by majority vote of the remaining members present, for quorum purposes, you're still there. Now, the minutes should note that you stepped out, and they should note that you're still counted as present because you weren't excused. All right? In other words, the council gets to decide whether, when a member steps out, the members, that is going to have an impact on the quorum. So what if you're a member and you do want to stop the council from conducting business, and you think, you know, there's only going to be a bare quorum at the meeting? What do? You just don't show, right? You just don't show at all. Then you're absent, and this rule doesn't apply. Okay?
Excuse me, sir. What about if a member walks out without receiving permission from the quorum or being excused?
So then you're still deemed present for quorum purposes. And it can have an impact on voting, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you're excused, then you're not present for quorum purposes. And so if that means that there's no longer a quorum, that means you got to stop the meeting until the member comes back. Okay, a little bit about motions. There are basically two categories of motions. The first is the main motion or substantive motion. That is a motion that brings some kind of substantive proposal before the council. I move that we adopt the proposed zoning ordinance amendment. I move that we approve the proposed budget ordinance. Okay? Then there are procedural motions. Now, Roberts actually has 5 different categories of procedural motions. All right? Again, a way in which it's unhelpful for small bodies. Okay? But procedural motions basically do something either directly or indirectly to main motions. I move that we approve the proposed ordinance. Well, I move that we postpone consideration of the proposed ordinance till next month. All right, that second motion is a procedural motion. It's doing something to the main motion.
Well, let me ask you one question.
Yes.
Because the way we work, we would never let the second motion come up until we voted on the first motion.
Okay, can we talk about that in just a moment?
Now, let's do it right now.
Okay. Well, okay. All right, our seconds to motion is always required. So if you were to take, and I know you all have the current edition of Roberts, and I know that you've all read it from cover to cover. And so when you read it from cover to cover, you, on page 487, came to a little section called Procedure in Small Boards. So even the good folks who put Roberts together have realized this book is not very helpful for small bodies. And so they have this little section that says, look, this is how you should modify our rules for small boards. And one of those modifications is this: motions need not be seconded. So under Roberts, if you're a small board, no seconds are required. In our suggested rules of procedure for city council, we also recommend not requiring second. Why? Well, what's the purpose of a second?
Make sure you have enough support for a motion.
Right. Well, if you're an organization with 100 members and a member makes a motion, you might want to know that at least one other person thinks that the assembly should spend time on that motion. If you can't get one other person out of 100 to agree that the assembly should consider the matter, it's not worth the assembly's time. Well, that doesn't make nearly as much sense when you're talking about a small body, right? If you're talking about every member 20%. And in the case of council members don't just speak for themselves, they also speak for constituents. And so there's an argument there that if a member makes a motion, because the member speaks also for constituents, that it's worth the council's attention. Now, yes.
Our code of ordinances does say there will be a second. So
Okay.
maybe that's something we need to look at.
So can you second? Yes, you can. I simply want to ensure that you understand it's not a Roberts issue. It's not a Roberts issue.
So what we need to decide is we want to
Yes.
adjust our ordinances
Right.
accordingly.
That's right.
So-
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay, motion before discussion or vice versa. Again, under Roberts, the general rule is you have to have a motion, have debate. But in the section for small boards, it says you can have informal discussion without a motion being on the table. And so if you do that, then just know that you're acting in accordance with Roberts. It's not a problem under Roberts.
But how would you know, how would you know what you were going to discuss?
Well, if you have an agenda item,
Okay, so it
Right.
would still be in your agenda.
it would be on the agenda, that's right. But you can talk a
You talk
motion.
about something without having a motion.
That's exactly right. Yes, sir. Okay, so now we can get to the mayor's point about procedural motions. The mayor, were you saying that you don't allow procedural motions to be made?
Well, what I'm saying is we generally, if Councilmember Williams makes a motion to do something and it was seconded, we don't let else come in and do another motion until we've addressed his motion.
Not even a motion to postpone it or refer it to a committee?
The motion to post brings that up, and if he says, I agree with that, then we've kind of backed up and let him do that.
So you treat it sort of as a friendly amendment, essentially?
I'm not going to say it's really.
Okay, well, I don't know if your ordinance is written that way. Parliamentary practice, you can make procedural motions that would act on main motions. They don't have to be friendly. And these are some of them that can be. We only have a few of them in the suggested rules. If you go to Roberts, there's another reason why I say people think they're following Roberts, but they're not. Roberts actually at the end has a chart of its procedural motions, and it's 40 pages of charts. So a lot of them in Roberts, and the rules vary widely depending on the kind of motion. Well, let me ask you this. Suppose you have a motion to adopt an ordinance, all right, and it's been seconded and there's debate. Do you allow someone to call the question?
I think we have in the past.
Okay, that is a kind of procedural motion, which we'll talk about. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but sometimes there's a question about what procedural motions are in order. Procedural motions are ranked. In Roberts, in any manual that you'll get of parliamentary procedure, they're ranked. And the basic rule is a procedural motion is in order unless a procedural motion of higher rank is pending. So if you look at this, these are in order, so the highest is to adjourn. So under the rules, if you all were considering, say, a motion to adopt the budget ordinance, and say there was debate, and you weren't getting anywhere, and the meeting was late, and you simply weren't ready to vote on it, while that motion to adopt was pending, a member could adjourn. A member could move to adjourn. And if the motion to adjourn were approved, it would adjourn. The meeting would be over. Why? Why is it like this? Because I mentioned earlier that a key purpose of parliamentary procedure is to promote efficiency. But another reason that we have these rules is to protect a deliberative body from being forced into making a decision when it's not ready. When it's not ready. And in that case, you could use a motion to adjourn to avoid making a decision that you weren't ready to make. Right? So that's just a quick example of how it works. So if you had a motion to approve an ordinance and then there were a motion to amend, while the motion to amend was pending, could you have a motion to postpone everything? You could, because if you look at the chart, you'll see that the motion to postpone outranks the motion to amend. That's basically how it works. Any questions about that?
Of course, you still would need the majority vote.
Right. For any of those motions, yeah, you'll have to have a majority vote.
So in reference to the adjourn portions you just stated, what's the time frame? I mean, you say I adjourn this time, next meeting not ready. What's the time?
Repeat the question.
When you say that they can make a motion to adjourn because they're not haven't decided on the issue, what if the next council meeting, there's no decision, and they want to adjourn? I mean, is there a time frame, or once you implement that adjourn?
So adjourn is the meeting that you're in.
Right. That next meeting.
For most actions, for some actions, you have statutory timelines. Like there's statutory timelines for approving a budget.
Gotcha.
So obviously, you need to act in conformity with those. But for most things, you don't ever have to do them if you don't want to do them, right? So things can be put off as long as you want to, for the most part.
So in other words, that issue is not necessarily automatically brought back up unless someone puts it on the agenda or raises it.
All right, so, okay, maybe that was the question that I didn't understand. So if a motion is pending and you adjourn, what happens to the motion that was pending? It dies. Dies. It'd have to be brought back.
Somebody have to put it on the next agenda or whatever else.
That's right. That's right.
So we wouldn't consider it old business? If we never-
It might be old business on the agenda, right. It wouldn't necessarily have to be. Okay, just the preferred way of making motions. Mr. Mayor, yes, Councilwoman, I'd like to make a motion. You have the floor. I move whatever. Now, most places it's not going to be that formal. Mayor calls on someone, I move so-and-so. Oftentimes people say, I make a motion that. There's nothing wrong with that. But the preferred among parliamentarians, the preferred phraseology is I move. I move. All right, so here is an example of how the order of, and I didn't use this term earlier, but it's called the order of precedence, works for motions. Say you have a motion to approve an ordinance, then there's a motion to amend, and while that debate's going on, someone says, look, I don't think we're ready to make a decision on this, so I move we postpone it to the next meeting. Well, if you adopt the motion to postpone, what happens to the other two motions?
They go do it.
If you adopt the motion to postpone, everything is moved to the next meeting, right? Both the motion to amend and the motion to approve. You're just stopping and delaying, right? If the motion to postpone fails, then you go to the motion to amend, right? If the motion to amend is adopted, then what happens?
Say all I know is you sure are making our stuff a lot harder than it used to be.
Well, don't let me do that. Don't.
Oh, my God.
But it's not that hard if you just, think it through. If you move to amend, then if the motion to amend is approved, then what? Then you're back to the main motion as amended, right? If the motion to amend fails, then you're back at the main motion in its original form. That's all. Okay, any questions about motions? Now, here's the good news. The way you handle motions, you might be thinking, well, we don't quite do it that way. And if you don't, but you do it in a way that works for you, it probably will never be a legal issue. Because if there's a challenge to some action you take on the grounds that the vote was insufficient or whatever, what a court is going to want to know from the minutes is, or want to see, is some clear statement, some clear indication that people knew what they were voting on and that there was the required majority for it. A court is not going to go through Robert's Rules of Order and determine whether you followed it to the letter. All right, a few things about debate. All members should have a similar opportunity to speak. Obviously, you should be courteous and calling the question. What happens when someone says, I call the question? I'm asking, what do you do?
I always thought that meant, now we vote. Is that?
In a lot of places, and I was a school board attorney for a few years before I went to the School of Government, and I went to a lot of board meetings where if someone said, I call the question, well, we stop debating and we vote, right? That is not what's supposed to happen. And on this, I will tell you that if your practice is different from what I'm saying, I think you should change it. No one member has the authority to end debate for everybody else. Under Roberts, under the suggested rules, when a person says, I call the question, what that is a motion. It's a motion to end debate. And so you have to vote on it. You have to vote on it. And if a majority of the members vote in favor of the motion to end debate, then that's the council saying, as a body, we're tired of debating, we're ready to vote. But if a majority doesn't support it, then they're saying, we still want to talk about this.
But as long as they vote to do it, then it's okay.
As long as they vote to what?
If they vote to, well, if council member, whoever says, I want to call the question, and we ask the council, are you in favor of this or not? If the council's in favor of calling the question.
That's fine.
Then it's covered.
That's fine. That's right. That's right. But just understand, you don't have to stop debate just because a member says the magic words. Okay?
So question, really quick. So if that happened and the majority said we're ready to stop debate, there's nothing that any other council member can do to open that debate back up again, if they feel it necessary?
So your rules probably say that the motion's not in order unless everyone has had the opportunity to speak. As long as that's happened, if a majority votes to end debate and you're the individual member, there's really nothing you can do at that point. You can, because there's not even anything to appeal. So yeah, you're pretty much stuck at that point. Because again, we're a majority rule system. Okay, voting, a few quick things about voting. For most things, to approve them, you just need more than half. More than half of votes cast, a quorum being present. There are some special statutory voting requirements for some actions, and the big ones concern the approval of ordinances and contracts. So the statutory requirement for you to approve an ordinance or a contract is that you have to have a majority of all members not excused from voting. That can be different than a majority of votes cast, a quorum being present, depending on the size of the council. If you're voting to adopt an ordinance on the date of introduction, there's a higher statutory requirement. To do that, you have to have affirmative votes equal to at least 2/3 of the council's actual membership minus vacant seats. And counting the mayor, only if the mayor votes on all questions. And your mayor does vote on all questions, right? So that means we have 7, right? So that means you got to get, what, 5 affirmative votes to adopt an ordinance on the date of introduction.
And what does that mean by date of introduction? Does that mean if we have it on a council meeting for Monday, we're going to vote on it that Monday? And what you're saying is for it to take an effect that day, it's got to have the 2/3, is that what we're saying?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So the question is, what is the date of introduction? Well, the statute says that the date of introduction is the date on which the council first votes on the subject matter of the ordinance.
Okay.
And there's a lot of disagreement among city attorneys about what exactly that means. I favor a more conservative approach. If you treat it as the first day that you vote on the ordinance, then you're fine. All right. So to do that, to approve it on that day, you got to have that 2/3 majority. In a lot of places, they bring all their ordinances they do 2 readings on all ordinances. They end up voting twice. And that way, they never have to think about the 2/3 requirement, right? Because they're going to bring it back for a second vote anyway. And at the second vote, all you'll need is a majority of all members not excused from voting. More than half, that is more than half of all members not excused from voting. But you don't have to bring all the ordinances back for 2 readings. If you get that 2/3 majority on the date of introduction, you've adopted it.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
So hypothetically, right two members that have stepped out and left, and we were to adopt the ordinance, or make a proposal to adopt the ordinance now, we'd have to have five right now, as we see it right now.
You would, and they weren't excused. And so, as we'll talk about, they would be recorded as voting in the affirmative anyway. So you would definitely have that majority.
So they are, even though they're not here, they weren't excused, their vote is going to count as a yes.
Yes. And I will talk about that a little bit more in just a moment.
Okay.
All right, so here's an example. What's better than a little math, right? So suppose you have a council with 7 seats and 2 vacancies. The mayor we don't count because he only votes in the case of a tie in this scenario.
That's how they do it here too.
So on the date of introduction, the council votes 3-2 in favor of the proposed ordinance. Would it pass under the statutory 2/3 requirement? The answer is that it would fail, and it would fail because, it would fail because it wouldn't meet the 2/3 requirement. How would you calculate that? Well, you would take your total seats, you would subtract your vacancies, right? So that would give you 5, so you'd need 2/3 of 5, and that's 3.33. Now, do you round up or down? You have to round up, because if you round down, you'll be short of that 2/3 requirement. So they need 4 votes here, and they don't have them. And so the ordinance hasn't passed. They have to bring it back again if they want to approve it. Okay, we were just discussing the duty to vote. If a member, so in general parliamentary practice, you can abstain from voting. But when it comes to city councils, the General Assembly has adopted a statute that doesn't allow abstentions, right? You have a duty to vote unless you're excused. Unless you're excused because the matter concerns your official conduct or your financial interest, or because you're prohibited from voting. And there are 3 statutory provisions that are cited, and one has to do with receiving a direct benefit in public contracting. One has to do having a fixed position in or a bias in a quasi-judicial matter. And the other statute concerns legislative zoning decisions in which a member has a financial interest. So unless you're excused from voting, a failure to vote means that you are recorded as having voted in the affirmative. All right, so a couple of questions. Number one, who excuses a member from voting?
The city council.
The statute doesn't say. It uses the passive voice. So in a lot of places, now remember, this is where it can get confusing. We're not talking about quorum. Under the quorum statute, it's clear. You have to be excused by majority vote of the remaining members present. Under the voting statute, it's not so clear when it comes to voting. It doesn't say who does the excusing. Because it doesn't say, I think the best practice is for the council to do the excusing.
Well, and you said that we don't act individually, we act as a council. So
Right.
that would be a case where.
That's right. That's right. Now, you might.
Does the person needs to ask to be excused as well?
Yes.
Do you agree?
I agree. If the person wants to be excused, yes. Now, the person, there are sometimes cases where a person doesn't want to vote, but doesn't ask to be excused, knowing I'll be recorded as voting the affirmative, even though I'm not casting a vote. But yeah, if the person doesn't ask to be excused and isn't excused, then the default yes rule applies. Now, there's an exception. If the vote concerns the repeal or amendment of a zoning ordinance or a change to the zoning map, and a member fails to vote without being excused, you do not record that as an affirmative vote. That's the one time you would record it as an abstention. That's a wrinkle in the statute. And the wrinkle's going to get a little bit bigger come January 1st, 2021, because of some zoning legislation that's going to take effect then. At that point, any kind of zoning, legislative zoning decision that you would make in any vote involving that, the failure of a member to vote without being excused would not be recorded as an affirmative vote.
What happens if a person has to be excused and they feel strongly about their reasons for being excused, but the board says they don't excuse? What happens then?
So I'm a member, I believe I should be excused, the board doesn't excuse me. What I can do is not vote. Now, I'll be recorded as having voted in the affirmative, but there's nothing else I can do at that point. And if I were that member, I would make sure that the minutes didn't just say I voted yes, but that the minutes recorded that I was being counted as a yes because I wasn't excused. I'd make sure the minutes, in other words, I'd make sure that the minutes indicated that I did not vote. All right, does the mayor have a vote?
Melissa, when that does happen, which I know it's not often, do y'all dictate, do y'all put in the minutes?
We do, like sometimes if someone does not raise their hand for even just adoption of the agenda, and, that they don't raise their hand against it, then I do record it as.
As a hit?
Yes,
I mean,
like
do you
there
know
I
that,
am.
or you don't know that?
I go back and I verify on the recording that we have, our Facebook recording.
I would say, that anytime a member is recorded as having voted in the affirmative because of this statutory rule, that the minutes should say, member so-and-so is being counted as a yes in accordance with GS 168-75, right? So what about a member who doesn't show for a meeting? Is that member recorded as having voted in the affirmative? No. The member is simply absent. Okay. All right, does the mayor vote? Well, your charter says, yeah, the mayor votes. So I could tell you what the rule would be if the charter didn't say that, but it doesn't matter to you because your charter addresses that point. And of course, all your votes by statute have to be recorded in your minutes. All right, a few things about postponing matters. The motion to table is the most misused motion in all of parliamentary procedure. It's misused, and I'm not telling you you have to use it differently, but I feel as an educator talking about parliamentary procedure that I have a duty to make sure you at least know how it's supposed to be used, all right? Here's how it's supposed to be used. It's supposed to be used to set aside temporarily a matter that the council intends to come back to. And you do that when something unexpected has occurred that requires your immediate attention. A motion to table is almost never used that way. It's usually used in one of two ways. A member might say, I move that we table this till next month. That's not tabling. That's postponing to a date certain. You don't put a date on it when you table it, all right? The other way that the motion to table is used is to indirectly kill something. I move we table this, and we might never get back to it, right? It's a way to kill it without voting on it directly. That's also a misuse of the motion to table. There's a motion for that under Roberts. If you want to kill something indirectly, it's a motion to postpone indefinitely. So now I've told you, if you've been misusing the motion to table, you're welcome to continue to do that. I think the key thing is, does everyone understand how it's being used? That's the key thing. Of course, your rules probably specify a time for bringing something back that's been tabled. And if you don't bring it back within that allotted time, what happens to it? It dies. Does that mean you can never come back to it? No. It just means you'd be starting over, right? I've already mentioned the postpone to a certain time. All right, the motion to reconsider. This is a motion that there's a lot of confusion about. And the confusions are around two things. When can it be made and who can make it? When can a motion to reconsider be made? It has to be made at the same meeting at which the action to be reconsidered was taken. That can include a recessed meeting, because a recessed meeting is regarded as part of the meeting that it's continuing, right? But if you did something, if the council did something last month and you think, boy, we really need to undo that, a motion to reconsider at this month's council meeting would be out of order because it would not be timely. So who can make a motion to reconsider? It has to be someone on the prevailing side. Has to be someone who voted on the prevailing side. Why? Because if it's a member of the who voted on the losing side who makes a motion, there's no reason to think that the vote would turn out any differently if the council were to spend its time reconsidering the matter. But if a member who was on the prevailing side makes the motion, that's a strong indication that the vote might go differently a second time around, right? Notice it's prevailing side, not majority. They're not always the same thing. If you're voting on whether to adopt an ordinance on the date of introduction, you got to have a 2/3 majority, right? That means you could have more than half, and the motion fail because you don't have the supermajority required. So in that situation, who's on the prevailing side? The people who vote against the motion, right? The motion failed. The people who voted against it won. They're not a majority, but they won. If you have a motion, if you have a tie, what happens to the motion?
It's dead.
It fails, right? So who's on the prevailing side? The people who voted against it. They won, right? So, all right. So what if you want to take something up that was done at a prior meeting? A motion to rescind is one way to do it. That can be made by any member, and it can generally be made at any time. Some motions, some actions you can't rescind or repeal because you've created vested rights through the prior decision, and it would be illegal to try to repeal them. That comes up quite a bit in zoning. Okay. Any questions about any of that? I feel like we've gotten to the point, sometimes this happens in my classes, I look out and I have this belief that at least one person is hoping that I'll have a stroke. But no, we're not there yet? Okay, we're almost done. Okay. I'm not going to take up time on the managing public input unless there's something about this.
We want to talk about it.
I want to talk about this. Okay. All right. So you receive public input in lots of ways, but two formal ways are the public comment period and public hearings. Right? You have statutory authority to adopt reasonable rules for those, as I'm sure you already know. So I would invite you to ask whatever questions you want to ask now, so that I can get to whatever it is about these topics that you want to discuss.
We go ahead. Of interest to myself, and I think to my fellow council members, the conduct of public members who come to address the council, and what is and what isn't allowable conduct, and our policy that may address that.
So, one way that what you're talking about comes up, and I don't know if this is what you're getting at, is when members of the public, during the public comment period, criticize employees or criticize board members. And there's a view among some that it's inappropriate for members of the public to criticize at least employees during the public comment period, that those are personnel issues. And I don't know if you're getting at that or not, but I'll simply say on that issue, I think the law is pretty clear. You can't prohibit the public from criticizing employees or board members during the public comment period. Now, there is a difference that's recognized in the case law between criticism and abuse.
Or attacking.
Right. And so there, and it's not a clear line. It's a blurry line. It's very fact specific. Now, you can find extreme cases where, yeah, it's pretty clear that this is not a criticism, this is slander, it's abusive. That doesn't have to be allowed. But mere criticism, I think the manager's doing a terrible job, for example, or I think you all are doing a terrible job, or, that, I think, if you try to stop people from saying that, you're running the risk of First Amendment violations.
Question.
Yes, sir.
I know we're all elected officials here, but by default, are we still considered city employees since we're doing the work of the city? And I have a follow-up question.
No, I mean, for almost every purpose, no.
Okay. Well, my
And certainly, so just to try to relate it to the public comment, so for example, although you have statutory authority to go into closed session to talk about employee performance, you're prohibited from going into closed session to talk about board member performance.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason I asked that, because I was a city employee for close to 20 years. But one of the, just looking at the policy on, we all have free speech as well, but we still have to conform to a policy that states that verbal harassment, including comments, that are offensive or unwelcome, even including specific to race, color, religion, gender, expression, disability. If we have to abide by those, I mean, this is just my opinion, when anyone is on or in a city facility, they should have to, abide by that same ordinance, in my opinion. I mean, it's a harassment thing. Like I said, it has to be defined, and which it is in reference to city employees. And the reason I ask for we city employees by default is because our checks are endorsed by the city of Goldsboro at the end of the day. So that's why I was trying to just get a definitive answer on decorum, I guess you would say, in a public setting. Like you referred to slander, things of that nature. How are we covered or governed by code of conduct from both sides of the spectrum, I guess, from
Right.
the citizen and ourselves? How are we covered?
So I don't focus on personnel issues, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but my assumption would be that personnel policies aren't going to apply to council members unless they expressly include council members. So I wouldn't assume that you're covered by any kind of policy like that. You have more ability to restrict employee speech than you have to restrict the speech of non-employees, right? Employees, when they're on the job, are subject to greater restrictions, right? So it's not necessarily the case that what you can apply to an employee, you could apply to a member of the public. And again, I'm really focusing on public comment, public hearing. Criticism, yes. Abuse, no. Harassment, you might say no to harassment, but identifying in a particular case whether comments reach that level is not always easy. And harassment usually involves a pattern of behavior, right? And so it may not be an appropriate standard for public comment or public hearing. Slander is different. Saying abusive things about an employee or member because of a disability or based, that would go beyond criticizing the employee's performance. And so you'd probably have the ability to stop that. But you can't have a blanket rule that says no discussion of city
I've seen a couple
employees.
towns
Yeah.
make you sign up and say what you're going to talk about. What would be wrong with that?
I think that there's nothing wrong with asking people to sign up. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them to write down what they want to speak about. The question for which we don't have an answer because it's not been litigated is, can you refuse to allow someone to comment during the public comment period if they say they decline to write down what they want to talk about?
Why don't you litigate that?
Well, the way it will be litigated is someone will sue a city. So, so you know, and you don't want to make that law, right? You know, I would just say my thought is I would not prevent someone from speaking because the person did not write down what the person wanted to talk about. Yes, sir.
Can't we set up some rules of decorum?
Yes, but that's not about decorum, right? That's different than decorum is how you behave, not what are you talking about. So that's a distinction.
Now, I'm not an attorney, but I did do some research pertaining to that. And it says government officials may not silence speech because it criticizes them, someone criticizes them, or even silence them, someone because they consider them troublemakers. So you can't silence them just because they seem troublemakers or they may say things that are offensive to you.
Yeah, I mean, the mere fact, offensive is not a good standard. Slander, abusive is a better standard, okay? Because what's offensive to people varies based on the sensitivity of the individual.
Can you speak to slander as opposed to, you know, your performance, your professional work compared to a private, personal issue, or however you refer to slander?
So slander would be, you know, for example, an allegation that, or it could be, just as an example, an allegation that someone has, you know, you're a thief, you know, or you're a rapist, or, you know, whatever. Now, truth is a defense to a claim of slander, so, you know, hopefully, you know, those statements wouldn't be true. But those kinds of statements that accuse someone of moral, serious, immoral, or illegal conduct statements like that can constitute slander. And they certainly go beyond, you know, criticizing someone's job performance.
May I read you, we have a policy that's is being proposed amended, if you will. And the proposed amendment talks about decorum being defined as correct or proper behavior that shows respect and good manners, and which does not include vulgar language, profanity, inappropriate gestures, insults, personal attacks, or accusations. Speakers are encouraged to be courteous and respectful, even while they may disagree with actions and/or policies of this city. Is there anything in there that you find questionable?
Probably need to send it to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general it's probably fine. Vulgarity, those kinds of standards are difficult because what does it mean? You know, that they raise that kind of issue. Restrictions on speech can be invalid if they're too vague, for example. And so, so you might be correct in the application of it in a particular case, but you just have to know that that's not necessarily an easy standard to apply.
We have to be very careful pertaining to the First Amendment, being unconstitutional when it comes to allowing someone to speak.
Right, and the key thing that you have to be concerned about or the key thing that can give rise to a First Amendment claim is treating someone differently based on their viewpoint. I don't want to hear from him because I know he's going to say something negative about me. I don't mind hearing from the next guy because he's going to say something positive about me. You know, that you can't discriminate among speakers that way. You can, I think, impose general standards of decorum. None of those would prevent someone from saying something negative. And part of that was, I think, key was there was a line in there about encouraging people to be courteous, right? I don't know that you can necessarily require someone to be courteous.
Sure.
But there's nothing wrong with encouraging it. I think that's fine. And if people are disruptive, there's a mechanism for dealing with that under the Open Meetings Law. Because it is a misdemeanor in the state to disrupt an official meeting of a public body. So if, for example, and how an example might be, I come up for my public comment period, I'm screaming, I'm being abusive, I'm directed to stop, I refuse, I continue to go, then you might be in territory where I've now violated that law against disrupting the official meetings of public bodies. A key thing to know about that law, though, it's not triggered, this is something for the mayor, it's not triggered unless the presiding officer instructs the person to leave and the person fails to do so. If you don't instruct the person to leave, there's not been a violation of that statute. So, did you?
Also, I apologize. Also, if we have say it's public comment period, and we have someone that's addressing some issues, but if it's not affecting the business that we're conducting at that time, then I don't think that it would be deemed as some wrongdoing. They're just expressing themselves. So I think if they were, like if we were in the middle of a meeting and the board was getting ready to do something that's going to benefit the city, if we had someone come in place and they start screaming and shouting, I think that's a reason to remove them, but not if it's public comment period.
Right. So citizens under the Open Meetings Law, they've got the right to be at your meeting, right? Any part of the meeting that's an open session. They don't have the right under the Open Meetings Law to interfere with the meeting. They don't have the right to speak at the meeting. The public comment statute is separate. There's one specifically for city councils, there's one for boards of county commissioners, there's one for city councils, all right? That's where the right to comment comes in, or at public hearings that are required by statute. Otherwise, they don't have the right to make comments during board meetings. If they do, and if it becomes disruptive, then yeah, they're subject to being, thrown out of the meeting or being ejected from the meeting. Now, in some places they'll say public comment has to be restricted to whatever's on our agenda. I wouldn't do that because I can understand limiting it to matters that are under the council's jurisdiction in general, but I wouldn't recommend confining it to what's on the agenda. The court might say that's a little too restrictive. Maybe I want to talk about what I think you're going to take up next month, right? That seems to me appropriate. Any other questions about that?
Yes, sir. And I don't want to keep kicking a dead horse, but I mean, hypothetically, if I have a disgruntled girlfriend that I dated 20 years ago, she sees that I'm married, she comes up to every council meeting saying, I've got 10 different girlfriends trying to, excoriate my character. I mean, you said habitual. I know this was a word you said before. If that person habitually comes, what actions or what restrictions, I guess? I know you're not putting a gag order on anybody per se, but what do you have to protect,
Is this person making comments during the public comment period?
Yes, sir.
About
just random things, just, I guess, to antagonize or
I mean,
heckle.
if the person is making comments that don't have anything to do with your status as a council member, then there might be a basis for saying you're out of order and you got to stop. As far as like personal harassment, that might be something you have to deal with under other laws, civilly, you know, restraining order or something like that. Did you have another question?
No.
Yeah, if you want us to look at a particular provision in your policy, you can send it to me, and I'll be happy to do that. Okay.
Well, let me ask you the question.
Okay.
All of us have seen, or should have seen, the proposed amendment to our policy. And I wanted to discuss this with our council members while we're in session here, and ask for a vote to amend that. But having listened to your presentation, I'm not sure that it would be proper to do so at this point, because it's not on the agenda specifically.
Is your attorney here?
No, it's not.
So, you know, I'm not your attorney. I can't, you know, act as your attorney. I don't know, is this a regular meeting? Is it on the regular meeting schedule or is it a special meeting? Yeah, so I don't know if you have any policies that deal with taking up business at retreats or anything like that, but if you don't have that, I'll simply say at a regular meeting, you have pretty broad authority to take up whatever you want to take up, as long as there's not some statutory provision or some provision in your rules that restricts you from doing that, from taking up whatever the particular item is. So,
Is that a yes, that we could proceed?
well, again, I have to try not to function as your attorney.
Sure, I understand.
So, if there's not a statutory or policy reason why you couldn't, then I don't know of any other reason why you couldn't, legal reason.
Well, I don't want to interrupt your session, but I do, if it's felt that we could address this, then I would like to do so.
Ron should be here this afternoon if you choose to.
Okay, we'll wait for Ron then.
Okay.
Thank
Anything?
you.
Yeah, sure. Anything?
Great job, you've done a perfect job of confusing us.
Well, that was the opposite of what I wanted to do.
The good thing is Melissa listens well, so I'm sure she'll pick up.
Okay, and just at the end, and I'm not going to go over these, but just at the end, I've included some of the things, some of the modifications that Robert says you should make to its rules when it comes to small boards. And I used to bring this up when I was a school board attorney because occasionally someone would come up to me after a meeting and say, the board was all messed up, there weren't any seconds, and I'd say, you got to turn to page 487 in Roberts, it's not required. Any final questions? Okay, thanks for sitting through that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, great job.
Thank you.
All right, I guess I'd like to leave for lunch.
Pizza is on its way.
Just give
Can we pass, Melissa, can we pass out this proposed amendment, or we adjourn here so you have it beforehand? Look at it if you haven't already.
But David, I'm telling you, based on what he said, we hadn't talked to Ron about this at all. I mean, they might be, I'm not prepared to do this today. I think he needs more the definition of what's what. I mean, you heard what he said.
Well, it came from Ron, though.
Well, I mean, but we hadn't talked about it as a council.
Okay.
And we hadn't talked about it as Ron.
Can I see a copy of that, so,
You- I
just
think-
so I can read it, please?
I thought we put one on everybody's desk.
It was emailed to everyone.
My machine is acting up. Thank you.
Is that it, Bill? Yeah. I thought we did give everybody one, but I don't know. All right, so what are we doing now?
So we can take a quick break for the lunch, and then Chief of Fire Department Dixon is here to discuss
Do you know how far
that.
out lunch is? Do you have any idea?
Laura said that the gentleman said they just got.
Okay, good. Well, let's somebody get something to drink then, and then we'll.
ready, gentlemen? Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. Honorable members of the council, our mayor, colleagues, and citizens that are listening. Of course, I am Joe Dixon, and I am the fire chief for the Goldsboro Fire Department. Thank you for this opportunity. The city manager approached me, and we were talking about in his effort to make Goldsboro and Goldsboro Fire Department a model of excellence in government, asked me some very specific questions. Do we have the right staffing? Are they capable and available when needed? And are they in the right place? Meaning, are they available for optimal deployment? And some of the things that we talked about certainly came up with some objectives. We realized when we looked at the apparatus, and I'll get into that later, is that the apparatus is the sub-metric that was mentioned yesterday. They said it's 99% availability in the city. Well, I'm like, well, absolutely can't. It must not be taken into account, the fire department. So I'll show you numbers to support that. And they say heavy equipment, which would, cover fire department apparatus, that would be included in that. The next thing we talked about was, what are we doing for staffing? We look at, is our staffing level correct? He asked me about overtime versus our the regular staffing. Our overtime numbers, if you look at it, and I'll show you, are very good compared to like-size municipalities. And the reason being, we do not have a mandatory 4 people on an apparatus, as some places, it's 1710, NFPA standard recommends, and some places have adopted. So that saved us money. But some of the things that, in collaboration with the city manager, that he's allowed me to do is, as we come up with these shortened staffing problems, we have been able to run a short academy that's in the middle of the year because we were down so many people. Now you say, hey, we're down people, we're saving money, but what that does, because we don't have that, it's a morale issue because people can't take leave, they can't get off, and happy employees are better employees. We also are considering part-time staffing. The reason that we're considering part-time staffing, you say, well, why would we do that? It is, we have people that those would be the people that already have skills that would maybe be on at another fire department that live in Goldsboro, but they may be working in dorm, but we get them at a cheaper rate and we don't have to pay those benefits. We're trying to look at every way, because if we keep doing things the same way we're doing it, we're going to be going down to a point where we just can't sustain it. And of course, the military model is the cost of a college education, annual colleges for a state institution is still under $10,000. So the military model will be, we would have an agreement with students where they would come in for 2 years, a 2-year agreement. We pay for your college, we give you a small stipend. And again, we know they're not staying, but we pay them a lot less, and we don't have, what's killing municipalities is the fact that they have to pay OPEB, post-employment benefits, that liability that builds up associated with that, with employees staying. So those are a lot of things. And then the last thing is the EMT requirement. Years ago, right now, I just double-checked with, because this was another concern, a concern of your constituents, a concern of the city manager, and when we look at it, the representation of the city, one of the metrics that we came up with is that the fire department used to be over 50% minority. Right now, we're down to maybe 12%. And it's, yes, sir, and it's getting to be less because of some of those the people that are retiring. Now, one of the things that changed, one of the sentinel events when I investigated and looked at that was the requirement of EMT. I don't know why exactly that occurred, but it's certainly around that time the numbers start going down, the number of minorities entering going down. Now, one of the things that I tried to do is develop, go into a partnership with Wayne Community College, the NAACP, and fund those scholarships, but I've gotten 0 people from that scholarship opportunity that have taken that. But what we're looking at is maybe having a certain amount of position where we do not require EMT to assist us. And so in summary, again, we're just seeking assistance in acquiring resources needed to provide core public safety services to our citizens, members, and guests. Now, I'm all about the data. So most of you, I've had conversations with everybody here, and I'll move through this quick, but just to show you there's data available, and even when you have, the police has a data analyst. Now, when you have a person that's doing a job, again, you have to pay that salary, and so what their base salary is $40,000, but you have another $15,000 on top of that goes into their benefits package that you're paying. You know, we have an opportunity. So this is what I get from, and I've shown it, I can do a demonstration, have one for the city council, but I've shown this to the assistant to the city manager as well as the city manager, that it has information that helps us make better decisions, funding decisions, which is what this is all about when we're developing a strategic plan. And this is to show you, it's just an illustration of where our budget is, and it's basically been stagnant. And normally when you have a stagnant budget, it's behind because the cost of all the goods and the services that we contract are continuing to go up. But because the city council agreed to allow us to reorganize the department, I'm proud to say that this year, even with fully staffed, so we're projecting our budget now to be fully staffed because of the retirement, so we're losing those people at the top. Our salaries are going to be 2.5% less than they were the previous year. That's unheard of. And this year we're also expecting, and that's because of those, we've added those additional layers in there for people to come in, they go to lieutenant before they go to captain, battalion chief before they go to assistant chief. And so that has generated a cost saving for us in the salary. So we've been good stewards. And of course the overtime budget, because of that also, I now have the people that are on day work instead of, hey, have somebody else come in. I got an assistant chief sitting here, you need to be riding the car, the battalion chief car, versus calling somebody else in to do overtime, or I'll ride the car versus hiring somebody else because we're here in the office. We can leave this and go do that because responding to our citizen is what's most important. So again, we've been very good stewards of the money. And this is just an illustration, you know, right sizing. It's all about having the right information to show that we're doing the job that we need to do with the resources that we have. And how do we understand that we are doing that? Well, there are studies. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, did a study, and they took basically multiple 2,000 square foot facilities, and they took various sizes of crews, fire engine crews, to respond to the same type of fire set in the same place and with the same task, throwing ladders to see what they needed. And when you hear this, you as council members have heard this over and over again, probably about this staffing issue. Standards are not laws, but you are going to be held accountable for them in a court of law if something were to happen. But when it makes a recommendation, the important thing to have when we talk about data is the data that supports whether or not you're doing the right thing, because we can only afford what we can afford to do. But you should establish a standard of cover and then fund it appropriately. I believe it's Ms. Bertha Johnson, that's what she talked about before, because I can tell you this, the fire department believes we can put a man on the moon, in the sense of what they were talking about. We believe in that. So when they start believing, I hope you've seen the added value and the attitude and the program that we've been delivering to the city. So we understand, and when you call us a fire department, we're doing more than fire. So I'm proud to also tell you that this year, we will be a Type 3 water rescue team. And the importance of that being recognized by FEMA as a Type 3 water rescue team, again, it's another feather in the cap for Goldsboro. Not Goldsboro Fire Department, yes, that too, but for the city of Goldsboro. And as a recognized asset within the state, you can be deployed and you know exactly how much you're going to be getting back for that asset. This is a depiction of what is expected to happen on a fireground scene. You say, well, how many people do you have? Why do you know, most of the things that we do when we arrive on the scene, you have an incident commander. You have what they call a RIC or our RIC team. You have a crew that's going in with your initial attack hose. You may have overhaul going on at the same time, or you may have a backup crew. You have someone going to the roof to vent. You have a search and rescue team. You have a safety officer. You have all these particular things where for it to be a safe fireground operation, you have to staff it. You have to have the people, the effective firefighting force that arrive on the scene to do it. Now, Chief, how do you know that we do that? Well, what we have here is a picture of, this is what Goldsboro Fire Department, you see up in the top left, one engine. I put the 3.5 there again because we don't have a mandatory 4. So we looked at the staffing over the course, of a year and say how many people do we normally average on all the apparatus across for Goldsboro Fire Department. So when we have a typical, what they call a moderate risk, which is that 2,000 square foot home, we send 3 engines, a ladder, and a battalion chief. That's the initial assignment, 15 people. So we don't get 17 people on the scene. What that means is, and I can tell you, coming from a department that ran 40,000 calls a year, that the men and women of Goldsboro Fire Department work hard. They work hard, they get the job done, but what they're used to seeing are the bread and butter type events, those smaller, what they call low risk, high frequency events. My fear always comes in when we have the low frequency, high risk event to make sure that they're able to mitigate it appropriately. So this is, are there any questions about this? This just shows the staffing level. Let me see if I can get again, we had 3, 4, so that's 4 pieces of apparatus. You multiply 4 times the 3.5, that's how I came to 15. What we look at down below with mutual aid is that this is what we may be expecting to get from Belfast, Arrington, Marmac, when they come in and they provide assistance to us to help us get some of these numbers up. And with some of the tasks that we got going on. Because the other piece is just like, the city manager and I was going back and forth, and we were talking about Marines and firefighters, no different. They will continue to work, and you say, hey, you okay? Yeah, we're good, but they need to rotate. They need to get out. They need to rest. They're putting themselves at risk, and they will continue to do that until they fall out. If you don't say, no, it's mandatory. You need to go over here and rehab, and then we'll allow you to get back in. And again, I'm very proud of the men and women I work with. So how do you say we're doing a good job? Well, we look at the metrics that you guys have that we're establishing that you'll be able to look at, and they'll be updated on a monthly basis. To show, well, do we get to, on a typical call, do we arrive within 4 minutes, and how often do we do that? That tells us, basically gives us our performance. And most of the time, we're looking, the metric is 81%, and we can look. And this is the 8 minutes. So 4 minutes is 1 unit, and 8 minutes is for the full response. And we're arriving well above that at 99% right now. So that means, I don't know what the first unit, because the first unit in 4 minutes is a little bit behind, a little bit below the metric when we reported that. That's why I put this one up. But we get the whole, when everybody else gets on the road, they get there within 99% of the time, all our units are on the scene. That's pretty good. That's well above University of North Carolina School of Government metrics. So that's a positive. Another thing that should tell you is that we have our equipment, our apparatus strategically placed in the right place. And I'll talk about the 2014 study in a bit. So again, this echoes my point. If the times are low, with 99% of the time we're getting there, that means we're doing things good. If they're bad, if we were high, that means maybe we do need to make an adjustment. The other thing we talked about, you have personnel. I think we're doing really good with our personnel, but what about our apparatus? Aging apparatus costs. Now you can look at what this tells you is that's the age of each unit over there, unit age, and the city's policy. I looked at the city policy. The city says you replace apparatus after 20 years. Now we have apparatus, and this is fire engines, fire trucks, 30 years old, 29 years old, 22 years old. What you also have to look at is the in-service rate for our frontline units. So we do have engine one that's a stalwart. It's getting it done 100% of the time just about it's in service. And that 1% may be for regular maintenance. But when we have 69% and down to 42%, the first thing I was looking at, I was like, wait, that's a specification issue. Whoever spec'd that, it must not have been a good job, whether it's the transmission, the engine combination. But if you look at it, these two are twins. Engine 3 and engine 4 are twins. One's in service 90% of the time, the other's in service 42% of the time. So sometimes, I don't know, maybe one was finished on a Wednesday, one was finished on a Friday. You don't know what happens with that. It may be the mechanics. We don't know, but it is what it is. But when you go through all these numbers and you take the percentage of what was in service for one unit to be in service for a whole year, you use 365 hours, 365 days times 24 hours, 8,760 hours within a year. So if you took the percentage of what we lost here, it's just under 12,000 hours. That's a unit and a half, basically a fire engine and a half that we don't have on a daily basis. And the reason I'm telling you this is because right now, as of today, we had 3 reserves. You said, why do we have 3 reserves? Well, the reserves, whoops, didn't mean to do that. The reserves aren't in the best shape because they are 22 years old, 29 years old, and 30 years old. So they aren't in the best shape. So, and we don't have, when I originally came, and again, all about that, and I told him I wanted this, he didn't start doing the in-service rate for our reserve engines. But,
Or 6, 7, and 8, they're all reserves, is that what you're saying?
yes, sir. Yes, sir. But 6 is actually, so, sir, I will tell you, I told him to take 6 permanently out of service because it hasn't passed an annual service test, but they keep using it. And I say, well, when you do that, and the city manager, the mayor, the council people, they see it in the station, they say, no, I see one right there when you're using it, because again, they're trying to make it work. If it doesn't meet the minimal standard, we're hurting our own effort. So and engine 6 was the one a few weeks ago. There was a fire. Our former councilman, Councilman Foster, I believe, there was a fire, and there was a problem with one of the engines on the scene while we had people working inside, and it failed on the scene, and it was one of our reserves. So that's also one of my concerns with that. Are there any questions about this slide, in particular the numbers and
Which one again is your backup ladder tower?
engine 6, engine 8, engine 7 are the backup engines, and we also have one aerial reserve, which is that's ladder 1, and that's 19 years old. That backs up the Quint that's at Station 2, which is an aerial, has a ladder on it, and it also backs up Tower 1. This is something I'm not even going to explain. I know, right? But what I wanted to show you is that things have changed. Now the expectation is that the new logistics chief, this is part of a pivot table. And he's made a pivot table that show him basically the operation costs, the maintenance hours, everything associated with the cost, because when you develop a replacement plan for your apparatus, it's all about the total cost. The cost from when you originally purchase it, to maintain it, to fuel it, all those things. So it's called a U-curve, which you'll see in a second. So all of that is dumped into here. He has a monthly cost, a year-to-date operating cost, and this is just a quick depiction to show you how things have changed, how we're using data to help me make decisions and justify what I'm asking you for. And that develops into what they call the U-curve, because the U-curve, you just heard me talk about the original cost of it, the capital cost of it, the repair cost, and holding on to it because you're having it there. We have equipment now that is not worth owning. There's no cost. We may get $5,000 for engine 6, and that would be for the metal. It has no worth to it. So the best point to sell it would be at this optimal point here, where you can get some of your money for it, something in return, a return of your investment for it. And that's the U-curve theory. So again, this is the standard. NFPA, again, another standard. Each fire department, I can tell you a fire engine in New York versus a fire engine in Goldsboro, the life cycle is much different. That engine, because of the street, because of the stop and go, typically the cycle where they replace the apparatus is much faster than here in Goldsboro. But what we do have to do is establish what our life cycle is going to be, and it should be based on the data. Again, thanks to the city manager, because we had a problem with getting the data from the shop and access to RTA, which showed us the cost that we were doing for our in-house maintenance on our apparatus. We had our outside, but not the in-house. Now we have access to that, which is dumped into the slide you previously showed me. So even using, life cycling is what it is. It shows everything. We developed that, and it's all going to be based off of data. Whew. Now this is the way forward. Because when you ask, because nobody should be showing you guys problems without also delivering solution. Now, it's expensive, but you know, we know Councilman Pollock has a bunch of money stashed somewhere, and if he wants to fund the whole thing, you know, that's great. But what this shows is that we have 7 engines. We have 3 aerials or quints. So that's engine 2, which is a quint. So it has a ladder on top of it. So FEMA defines you either have an aerial or you have an engine. Now, a quint can go in either class, but for this purpose, we have 7 engines, 3 aerials or quints, 1 brush truck, 9 support vehicles, and a passenger van. Now, you establish the city right now in policy, the city says it's 20 years. But even at 25 years, what this is saying is that we should be replacing it. Now, to fund that, when I come to you and say, and it's happened before, I need a fire truck. You say, Chief, how much does that cost? Well, it's going to cost a little north of $1 million, about $1.2 million. We can't afford that. We got other things that we need to be funding. Well, this is under your charter. This is a service that you need to provide. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it well. But I understand you have street to pave, other things to do, Herman Park Center. But if you put a little bit away every year, which is what we'll get to, that it's less of an insult on your budget if you plan for it. And the city of Goldsboro used to have a capital replacement plan. So what this is depicting is that we talked about, this is most of our capital assets. I may have missed something, but this is the engines. We talked also about a fire station, SCBA, which you guys have been funding that, but we eventually are going to have to replace that. Radios, the cost of these things is pretty expensive. $9,000 a piece, 9,000 times 50 units. You see how much that is. That's pretty expensive. So what we do is if we were to, we talked about Station 3 primarily, and that had a 50-year life cycle. The city actually says 40. But if we were to build Fire Station 3, which right now we know is one of our fire stations, it's the oldest fire station. We've actually done everything with all the other stations. Station 3 is in a position right now because it's a back-end station. You guys probably know the story associated with that. I won't get into that. But we've had some talks about the property around it, making it a hub. It's going to be it would be a public safety center, not just a fire station. But in doing all that, bond referendum, this is how much we would, again, it's a big number, but this is something that Chief Dixon just gave me. Take a look at. Somebody else has to figure it out, but this is a way forward that would fund all these things. And then every year after that, once you get through the second year, it's $513,000 a year, which would fund everything going forward. Now, $513,000 is less than what the cost of our fleet is, about $6 million in totality. When you look at the 100-plus cars that the police department had, it's about the same. And ours are in service longer than the police department, which their average time in service goes from 5 to 8 years, where though our average time in service, because we have most of our larger apparatus is 25-year service life that we're adopting, is going to be in service for much longer. So you get certainly more out of it. Are there any questions about this? I imagine there would be. Okay, wow. And again, asset allocation. Our stations in the right place at the right time. Most of you were here when this study was done in 2014, and the station placement was considered. There was a talk about a station at Ash and Berkeley, and there was a talk about consolidation, which now you spent millions of dollars between 1 and 4. So there's no way no way you're going to consolidate 1 and 4 now, because that certainly wouldn't be just wouldn't be a good look. So our stations, when you look at this and when you look at the report and when you look at the numbers, are in the right place, because one of the things that they talked about is, are we getting our equipment there and our people there in a timely manner? So if we're at 99%, which is well above the standard, then that means we're getting there in time and our equipment is in the right place. Now, they're not staffed to the level that we want to be staffed with 4 people, but they are getting there, so that means they're in the right place. So I don't think we had to do that. The one thing we would have to look at, of course, is hopefully addressing Station 3, the concerns with that. And this is just some other information out of the report, how many road miles that each particular engine or station covers. Station 1 here, Station 2, Station 3 in the green, Station 4, and Station 5. And these are our two. The difference between these two is one is talking about the engines, and this is referring to the two ladders. And we just talked about this just a little bit ago and what we've done. You know, the fact that, you know, Station 3 is 53 years old, and, you know, we've talked about it. We're doing our due diligence in researching opportunities, and hopefully that we could bring that to fruition for the citizens of Goldsboro and those that visit. And this is just a depiction of the response area for each of I'll be going through. This is the 4-minute response area. The darker green, a little lighter green is the 4 to 6 minute response area, and this further out is going to be your 8 minutes, 6 to 8 minutes response area for engine 1 or Station 1. The same for Station 2. All their response, and of course some of this overlaps. And if, you know, like there talks about you used to seeing circles, but because circles are as the crows fly. This is actually by the road miles that they respond to. If you have questions, I'll go back or I'll stop, but that's just showing you. And again, it's going back to that metric that we get there more times than we don't, and the time providing an effective force on the scene. Now, the roadblocks, of course, are going to be, you know, Chief, you just put up this big number. I put up the number, and as the leaders of our government, you know, it's up to you to make the decision and for us to collectively figure out a way to do it, to provide the service, the best service that we can to our citizens. Understanding that there's always the threat of recession. There's always the cost of competing initiative. But it's my job also to share with you what I feel like we need. And this was a slide I put in because there's something that's certainly facing the state government, heightened the need for municipal officials to be prudent in budgeting. Local government need to be physically solvent. We understand that, but they also need to demonstrate service solvency. And that's, what are we going to do? The ability to provide the level and quality service needs to ensure general health and welfare of the community. And that's it's not quite verbatim, but it's very similar to what the city said they're going to do in providing for our citizens and what we should expect. And this is what's important. It's not just the first responders, it is the citizens that we respond to. Making sure, when I got the call, I was listening on the radio, and I was heading down to the Devereaux Street incident. And when I heard that there was we had active fire and people were inside, and it was, again, it's a testimony to the level of proficiency that we have in the department at our incident commander level, that they were able to work around that. But that's a dangerous situation. And I want to make sure that we take care of the people that we serve and the people that I serve as a servant to the citizens and the men and women of Goldsboro Fire Department. And again, I put this up here again because it's just the city manager said, you got that in twice. I said, it's important. I just want to make sure they see it. It is what it is. It is what it is. And there are other ways you can look, because we're looking for a way forward. I believe, again, we can put a man on the moon. We can be a model of service excellence within, beyond the state of North Carolina. And that's what I believe in. The Goldsboro Fire Department, I hope that you have seen, again, the initiative, what they've been doing, how they've been looking, the uniforms, esprit de corps, and they're adding service. They're doing things that they haven't done in the past. And we're saving money. We're being good stewards. So I just ask you that you support us in the best you can. And I understand you had to be fiscally responsible, but, we're happy to serve. And thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Any questions, Chief?
I want to make a comment, Chief. I just want to thank you. Being a former firefighter, I've seen the trend change dramatically in your presence, in the department's presence in the community, via social media and the works you do. I also want to thank you for collaborating with the Wayne County Schools and the program which I teach. And the prerequisite of not having to have your EMT, I think it's going to bring more people into the department, and I think that's a good change that y'all are looking forward in doing. That's
Yes.
all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay.
Chief, sir. So what are some of the needs that the fire department is gonna need most of all?
Most of all, you know, thank you for that. I don't know if everybody heard, Councilman Williams asked, what does the fire department need most of all? And to save the city money, I think what we have to do is address our apparatus needs. Because we have, again, having apparatus that, when you look at those numbers, we have more apparatus than we actually need, because even our reserve apparatus are basically, they're in poor condition. The fire department has actually sent one of our members who has mechanical background to get a certification so that he can assist also in saving money, because we charge about $120 per hour to fix our apparatus. So now we have somebody that we can deploy internally that could assist in cost saving. So because when it's not available to us, it's no good to us, and it's no good to the citizen.
Pertaining to your breathing apparatus, do you have enough of those units in place?
Yes, sir. And we're still, the city has been, again, done great with some of the things that we do. They have been replacing on a regular basis is their PPE, their turnout gear, the coats and pants that they wear into the fire, and their self-contained SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus. That's something that the city council has been very on point about replacing. So thank you for that. But there's a point when we have 15 years that's going to be in service. We're going to have that in service, and we're looking to, have a plan that we know everything has a life cycle, including employees. Once they come in the door, once we purchase something, once we build a building, we want to have a plan for funding when it's replaced. Thank you all again.
Thanks, Chief. All right.
Good morning to each of you. My name is Goldie Harris Smith, and I chair the Housing Authority Board for the City of Goldsboro. And I'm just glad to be here today with our support of some of our board members. Our board members that are here, would you please stand? And Phil, who is also our attorney. Thank you. And it's so great to see you also, Mayor. But I'm not going to stand up here for you long, because we have our staff that's going to come up and give you a presentation of what we're doing, how we are doing it. And my purpose right now is to just thank you for allowing us to be here, and also to just say that we need the support of our entire community to do what we're doing for our residents. It's not just for them, but in order for us to continue to get the support and cultivate what we're trying to do, we need you to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it. And I say to you, once you hear the presentation from our staff, if there are questions, and there will be probably questions that you have, and a lot that you won't understand, because we are doing a lot of things that we are trying to put together to improve the residents' living, to bring forth a better quality of living for our residents. And we need your support, but we want you to understand that. So please, if there's any time that you want to meet with Anthony or any of our staff, top staff, they will come out, visit us, come out, look at the properties, what we're doing in the community, and you will see, you know, what we're doing, and you will understand a little bit of what we're trying to do. And we need that collaboration with all of us. We can't do it all within ourselves. We need your help also. We need your collaboration, your understanding of what we're doing. And we thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. I'm Anthony Goodson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Housing Authority of the City of Goldsboro. Council, thank you for allowing us to come today. Mayor, City Manager, thank you again for allowing us to come. Our presentation will be brief, but it'll be to the point. We want to make sure that we can serve our residents and serve them wholly, not just through housing, but through services. All right. If you've driven down Slocum Street, you can see that same building coming up right now. It looks very good, and it's going to look even better once the bricks get put on. There'll be 55 units over there, and we are paying 100% of the electricity and water costs for the residents. And so we hope this project will fill up pretty quickly. It will mainly serve our elderly. And so we're excited about bringing that to the community. That's a big investment to the community. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So who we are as a housing authority is what we'll discuss. Proactive plans for the future, and discuss how it's very, very important for us to continue our strong partnership. We cannot function in the same city without having a very, very strong partnership as we've had today. Next slide, thank you. So we were established in 1940. We have about 48 employees. We house over 1,300 families, as you can see, and we're the largest property manager within Goldsboro. 229 acres and 8% of the families. You know, I've heard 10%, but it's only 8%. And we invest $8.5 million annually in the city. That's a pretty big number. And if you look at the way our dollar stretches throughout the city, it's almost 3 to 1. So if you look at that number, it's probably more like a $24,000 investment to the city every year annually. And currently right now, there's a direct money going into the city of over $6 million, and that's cash. That's not, we didn't go out and get a loan for that. Those are direct dollars that are invested in these 77 units that we're putting together. We are a high-performing agency. That's denoted by HUD. We didn't come up with that slogan. HUD has said we're a high-performing agency. We also are an agency that has 0 findings with 2 different auditors for the past few years. So we run pretty efficiently, we run smart, and we are very careful with the public's dollar. And that's very important to us, that we're very careful with the public's dollar. I have some professionals that are following me today. These are obviously our properties. You more than likely know where they are. The professionals that will follow me today are Ms. Matilda Befford. She will go over the demographics of our housing authority, who we serve. That's very important. We're here to serve our residents and to serve the city of Goldsboro. We'll go over our programs and services. That's Ms. Oates, Sharita Oates. She's the director of our Jobs Plus program. And then we'll end with Ms. Michelle Wiggins to see where we're going forward. Well, we won't end. My staff will end with Michelle Wiggins, where we want to go. And then we had the pleasure, a big pleasure, of working with what we feel is the best expert across the country with Jobs Plus, the best expert across the country in putting together smart neighborhoods, Ms. Ray Parks of EJP Consulting. Currently, her group has just captured 2 of 5 of the implementation grants, I want to say, but she'll define more of that. But she has quite extensive knowledge, and she's an expert in the housing area as well as the community area. I don't think you're going to find anybody better than that. So I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Bedford. And if you could, please save all questions to the end so we can get through our presentation. And we'll stick to questions related to our presentation today. Any other questions that we have, please feel free to reach out to me. Teresa's here as well, so she can set up a time where we can sit down and chat. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Matilda Bedford. I'm with Goldsboro Housing Authority, Director of Asset Management. So I'm going to very briefly go over a couple of slides with you. The people we serve, we have 1,306 families that we serve. Broken down, it's 1,073 public housing resident families, 8 veteran voucher holders, and 225 choice voucher holders. The demographics, this is for the public housing side. Race, ethnicity, we have 98% Black African American, 2% white, 2% with Hispanic ethnicity, and 98% non-Hispanic. Household information, average household size is 2 people, 39% of households are one-person households, 55% of public housing residents stay in housing less than 5 years. We have a slide that shows the age for the public housing. 0 to 5 years of age, we have 19%, 6 to 17 years of age, 30%, 18 to 50 years of age, 32%, 51 years of age to 61, 9% for 62 to 82, and 1% that are 83 plus years. Here we have the family type, broken down by percentage again. We have 14% disabled elderly with no children, 1% disabled elderly with children, 6% non-disabled elderly, no children, 1% non-disabled elderly with children, 16% disabled non-elderly, no children, 6% disabled non-elderly with children, 45% non-disabled non-elderly, no children, non-disabled non-elderly, 45. Race, ethnicity for the voucher program, 91% Black African American, 6% white, 3% multiracial. The household information, average household size is 2 people. 36% of households are one-person households, and 45% of the voucher holders stay in HCV subsidized housing less than 5 years. Again, with the ages, we have 0 to 5, 10%, 6 to 17 years, 39%, 18 to 50 years of age, 31%, 51 to 61 years of age, 11%, 62 to 82 years of age, 8%, and 83 years plus, 1%. With the family types, we have 15% disabled elderly with no children, 3% disabled elderly with children, 2% non-disabled elderly with no children, 20% disabled non-elderly, no children, disabled non-elderly with children, 4%, 11% non-disabled non-elderly, no children, and 45% non-disabled non-elderly with children. Ms. Oates.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharita Oates. I'm the Director of Jobs Plus. Jobs Plus is one of 3 self-sufficiency grants that we have within the Housing Authority of the City of Goldsboro. The other 2 are our ROSS program, which is Resident Opportunities and Self-Sufficiency. And ROSS is available to any of our residents who reside in any of our public housing communities. Jobs Plus is exclusively for our West Haven residents, and our newest self-sufficiency program is our Family Self-Sufficiency Program, or FSS. That's going to be available to our residents who reside in Elmwood, Little Washington, Woodcrest, and also the residents living within the county that hold that are part of our Housing Choice Voucher programs. So being a part of our public housing self-sufficiency programs allows our residents to be a part of or take advantage of our extensive case management services that connect residents to support in the community to help them become self-sufficient. So things like getting their GED or going back to school, basic computer literacy classes, financial literacy, the list goes on and on. Anything that would help them obtain self-sufficiency. We also do a lot of in-house things as well. We collaborate with a lot of employers to host on-site hiring events and job fairs and things of that nature. Just to give you an idea of, you can go ahead, I'm sorry. Just to give you an idea, we also host housekeeping classes and basic driving courses, support groups for our women and men as well. So we do a huge variety of different things to help support our residents. But to give you an idea of how impactful our resident services departments are, and especially our self-sufficiency programs, we'll take a look at some employment data based on my program, which is Jobs Plus. So going back to the very first year of our grant, as you can see at the fourth quarter of 2016, 41.86% of our work-able residents who live in West Haven were actually employed. 38.46% of our Jobs Plus participants were employed, and a 1.86% of the Jobs Plus participants were actually earning a living wage. So fast forward 3 years to the fourth quarter of 2019, as you can see, those numbers have increased. So I want you to really focus in on that second one, where 51, more than half of our Jobs Plus participants are now working, where before we hadn't even reached the 40 percentile. So we are very proud of these numbers, and it shows the impact that our self-sufficiency programs are having on our residents and getting them back to work. So in addition to these life-changing self-sufficiency programs, we also have a very, very robust resident services department that includes our youth and our seniors. So we do different things for our youth. We have a HACG Scholar program. We have a homework club. We do things like hanging with the CEO and Girl Scouts, and we partner with Wayne County Public Schools and Wages and offer on-site early literacy programs and summer programs, and we also have a daycare on-site as well. And when we say we spend a lot of time and energy with our youth, we really try to expose them to things that they normally wouldn't be exposed to. Things like college tours to Georgetown University, or youth leadership conferences in Georgia, or putting kids on a plane to participate in a basketball tournament in Mississippi or Kentucky. So we are very, very passionate about exposing our youth. And also we believe that with that exposure, we'll help kind of break down the cycles of generational poverty. Everybody is not going to work, or everybody's not playing basketball, so we do focus in on our seniors as well. We have a senior center that we open a couple times a week that allows the seniors to come together and do things like bingo. We offer adult literacy classes to them. We do feeding programs, and then we do things like health sessions. We bring people in from the community, like the health department, and offer different things for our seniors as well. So as you can see, housing authority, or housing, public housing, is more than just affordable housing. It's a variety of different things to help our residents become stronger, help them become self-sufficient, and help them ultimately move out of public housing and completely off of welfare assistance. So if any of you are wondering how we might get the word out about our programs, we flyer the neighborhoods very heavily. We probably go out 2 or 3 times a week with the help of community coaches and different stipend workers. They help the staff go out and put in flyers indoors. We do monthly calendars that give a list of different things that are going on in the developments and outside in the communities. We give out our Community Connect, which is our quarterly newsletter that goes out to all of our residents. Gives a highlight of what we're doing in within the agency, and also gives us an opportunity to celebrate residents who are doing great things. So when you thumb through our Community Connect, you'll see faces of actual people, not clip art. People that you'll see in Walmart or driving down the street that are actually making strides towards their self-sufficiency. We have a very strong website, and we also have a very, very strong social media presence through our Facebook and Twitter pages. So if you ever wondering what's going on with the Housing Authority or who's doing what, check out our Facebook or Twitter pages as well. Michelle?
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Wiggins. I'm the Director of Grant Management for the Housing Authority, and I also work with them on special projects. So if your question before was, what does the Housing Authority do? We hope the question at this point is, what do they not do? We're housers, but we're also life changers. We're opportunists, we're creative, and we're looking for the best ways to make the biggest impact on not only our residents, but the community. So the question at this point is, where do we go from here, right? And we know that staying the course is just not an option. If you're familiar with the way public housing has traditionally worked in the past, you can have a public housing agency that provides subsidized housing. Maybe they don't do a lot of extra programs. You have units that get older and older. You have more and more people that need affordable housing. It just needs to be more available because more people need it. The statistics support that, and we could talk about that for a very long time. What we are looking at doing is being smarter with the dollars we have and looking for opportunities to make the most impact. So you can see some of the things we're talking about here. Diversification. Really, diversification is finding out how you can do more with what you have. How can you invest in other areas? How can you take what you do and find other opportunities to make more money to make the services that we need to happen? Because we know HUD has underfunded public housing for decades. I think the number now across the country for capital type needs is about $70 billion that are needed that are not available for public housing. So that goes along with the preservation and growth mindset that we have. We have to preserve housing opportunities for people, but we also have to figure out a way to grow, because the people that need affordable housing, unfortunately, with the way that the finances of our country are going, is not more people that are able to do it without any sort of subsidy or assistance. It's actually less people who are able to do it without that help. Financial viability, we are a business at the end of the day. We are a property management and real estate company. And if we think about it like that, we can't just think of ourselves as a government-funded entity who doesn't give much thought to where things are going and what we can do. And that leads us, that financial viability actually leads us to long-term sustainability, which is the model that we have been looking for. The landscape simply is changing, and we have to figure out a way to keep up with that and stay ahead of the curve. One of the ways that we have done that is to engage really smart people who have been across the country and who have seen things that have worked in other areas. That includes large metropolitan areas. It includes really small areas. It includes suburban rural areas that are very similar to Goldsboro. Because frankly, we know if we look at the models for places like Charlotte, that's great, and things can work in Charlotte that may not work here, and vice versa, but we also want to know what can potentially work here in this area. One of the ways that we've done that, and many of you have heard about this process before, is our capitalization plan process, and that's a type of strategic planning where we have enlisted a consultant to come in and talk to us and find out what our needs are, and that's what Ms. Parks is going to talk a little bit more about in just a minute when she comes up. But we completed that assessment between 2018 and 2019. We have the plan at this point, which includes a lot of different facets. They look at all of our properties. They do what we call a physical needs assessment, which says how much need do we actually have in the existing housing, because we can tell you that our housing is old and it needs additional infrastructure, but at the end of the day, what does that really mean? So you can see that number there. Our evaluated capital needs based on a 20-year repair estimate is $118 million. If we tried to do that with the funds that we have available through our capital fund, it would take about 60 years, and that would be if no new leaks or no new roofs were needed starting tomorrow. So now you can see why the financial viability and the creativity are so important. We also had them evaluate the residential market. So we're not just looking at a diversity of housing options that don't work for Goldsboro. We said, what will the market bear? Where are people moving? What type of housing do people want? Do they want to rent? Do they want to home own? What are those options? They've also examined our strengths, challenges, and opportunity, both as an agency and as a community as well, which I think is very, very insightful and very helpful. And then we're exploring the tools that are available through housing and urban development, whether that's grant programs or tax credit programs or whatever that are available both through HUD, local opportunities, NCHFA, and things like that. So I would like to give Ray Parks the opportunity to come up, talk a little bit more about planning, and one particular opportunity we'd like to share with you called Choice Neighborhoods.
Michelle, before you sit down, let me ask you one question. If this isn't for you, Anthony might know. The census, yeah, they're coming, and in like 2-3 weeks, they're gonna start sending out the stuff for the census. Are they in direct contact with y'all?
Yes, they're working with our resident service programs specifically.
Okay.
And then we are also very interested in making sure those numbers are accurate.
Yeah,
As you know,
that's what I'm after too. And I just want to be sure y'all are in touch with. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody.
How are you?
Good, good, good. So, this is a housing authority that, based on some of the data you saw already, is a very well-positioned agency. They are serving a significant number of families. The needs of those families are significant. And the Housing Authority has been very creative at stretching the dollars that it has. But based on our analysis, the idea is the Housing Authority needs to start being a little bit more proactive about planning its future. For example, the Housing Authority, for some of its sites, one of the recent storms that passed through had significant impact on Housing Authority assets. And then that creates a financial impact that has to be addressed because these, you have families living in this housing. You saw Michelle talked about the analysis about if nothing else changed and you're simply trying to preserve the housing stock that you have, it's about $118 million that you will need to try to upgrade the current housing stock that the Housing Authority has. So what we did was we looked at all of the Housing Authority assets, and the Housing Authority is in a fortunate position that it is doing development now, right? So it's not waiting, it's doing development now. And what we ended up doing is sort of organizing the Housing Authority's portfolio in sort of buckets of opportunity that allows it to lay out a roadmap for its future. None of this is about overnight changes or overnight success, but it allows for this very proactive discussion with its board and its families about how it would proceed. And so there are combinations of things from the plan or the recommendations that we've provided to the Housing Authority that we just want to kind of touch on with you here so you get a sense about where the Housing Authority is trying to go next. There are groups of sites that require renovation, and the Housing Authority is looking to renovate in place right now and preserve those assets. They're strategically easier to do, and some of these are it's smaller complex. There are opportunities where the market is not quite here yet, but these are assets that the Housing Authority should continue to hold and then evaluate periodically as it moves forward because the market might change over time, all right? Then there is a grouping of sites. There are opportunities that the Housing Authority can redevelop now because it can leverage the land that it owns and attract private sector investment to come in and partner with the Housing Authority to redevelop. And why would you look at redeveloping, right? The idea really here is under the redevelopment scenario, the Housing Authority is looking to diversify its portfolio. So this allows it to introduce other kinds of housing. So right now, the Housing Authority has 100% public housing or Section 8, so very, very low incomes, even though the Housing Authority has been doing a good job to sort of increase the numbers of families who are working and can increase their wages. But the idea for the Redevelop Now strategy is that they would be looking to introduce the idea of mixed income. So rather than having everything be 100% very, very low income, there would be a diversity of income types all the way to unassisted housing. And this is a model that has worked all across the country, and it allows for this kind of cross-subsidization where a market rate unit or an unassisted unit can help to cross-subsidize a lower income using. So this is one of the strategies the Housing Authority is looking at. And then there are some sites that there are a combination of things that the Housing Authority is looking at, including for Lincoln in particular, disposition of that site and then potentially redevelop the land. And then this last bucket here is another rehab strategy, but there are some challenges here because these sites also are in a floodplain. And so floodplain, you know, the 100-year and the 500-year flood, it's right now, the estimate is not a matter of if it's going to flood again, right? It's a matter of when. And so does it make sense to redevelop in a floodplain, or do you start strategically thinking about how you reposition some of this asset over time? Because frankly, if you are spending good money now to then be flooded out, even if it's a decade from now, right, there is a policy question about, is that a wise strategy? So these are some of the things the Housing Authority is looking at right now. So, tools. The Housing Authority is a small agency. It's not a wealthy agency, but it is a very strategic agency in how it has invested its dollars. So among the things that we have talked to the Housing Authority about is how it can leverage some of the tools that are available to it now. And some of these are more recent tools, some of those are revamped tools, but they may all be applicable here. And without going into the weeds of all of this, because some of this gets pretty technical pretty fast, the idea here is that there are a range of options that the Housing Authority has. And these options can lay out multiple pathways. They also can be layered on with each other. And one of the ones we want to talk to you about is the Choice Neighborhood Program, because if you remember this slide before where we talk about there are certain sites that the Housing Authority can explore redeveloping now so it can introduce a diversity of housing opportunities, right? Parkwood, West Haven, and Fairview. The Housing Authority is one of its implementation strategies that is looking at right now is to be able to commission a master planning effort for what those sites in a new redeveloped scenario could look like. Choice Neighborhoods, this third icon here, is a federal program that provides two types of money. On the one hand, it helps housing authorities leverage planning dollars. Right now, it's about $350,000 that is available that housing authorities can apply for, and that has to be leveraged locally. But that allows the housing authority to then be able to pay for a comprehensive neighborhood-based master plan in collaboration with the city, all of you and other stakeholders, to have a vision that can serve both the needs of the housing authority as well as the city. And so the second bucket, though, is that housing authorities are able to go after $30 million on average. This is also from the federal government. This year it happens to be $35 million, but on average it's been about $30 million to then help fund the implementation of these master plans that ultimately get developed. None of this is to say that the Housing Authority is automatically going to get any of this, but the idea is the Housing Authority is looking to explore a pathway of collaborating with the city to go after at least the planning grant, to collectively work together to develop a master plan. What does this look like? What is HUD going to look for, and why are we talking to you, right? Partnership. It is essential that for this city to compete well, there would be a partnership between the city, the Housing Authority, and others, right? So whether it's the school district or the service agencies, this is at the heart of it a neighborhood plan, and at the heart of it is the idea of collaboration. HUD is looking for 3 core goals. These happen to also be the same kind of goals the Housing Authority is interested in, and a neighborhood revitalization strategy. So it's not just about rebuilding a public housing site, it's about community. and what are the elements that make for viable neighborhoods of choice where anybody who have an option to either move here, or they're already here but are looking for ladders of housing opportunity will choose to live. The idea is addressing all of the neighborhood improvements, and this is where the city comes in. So whether it's around crime and safety, whether it's around improvements on sidewalk infrastructure, whether it's around expanded transit and access so folks who live in this community can then get connected to job opportunities, whether it's around how do you bring in other community amenities, what does that look like? And that's what the partnership around a collaborative planning process would bring. The housing, the idea here is that there is a public housing site that is targeted. Right now, the Housing Authority is thinking, if you remember the chart before, we had West Haven, Fairview, right? Those are the target sites right now that are the best candidate. And the market study that we looked at did affirm that those sites have the best market potential for mixed income housing as opposed to just very low income housing as it is today. So that plan would also be looking to replace a distressed housing authority property, and this begins to get at chipping away at the $118 million backlog, because those are among the biggest sites as well, and those are contributing to that backlog. And then the third and really, really critical piece is how do you support families so that they can thrive? So if you're an elderly person, the pathway for you might look different than if you're a family that is looking for work, or you are working but you need better wages, or there are children in your household that we need to have better educational outcomes for them. These are sort of the pillars of what a collaborative planning process would need to address, and a plan would then be developed that the city, the housing authority, and all the stakeholders would embrace as the vision for what you would want to do going forward. This is what it would typically look like. It's about a 24-month planning process, but in some cases, housing authorities have also been successful in receiving early action grant monies as well to jumpstart certain projects. And so if this city were one of those, then there would be another 18 months that would get tacked on. And the idea is that you don't want to just have this beautiful, pretty plan at the end of the day. You want a plan that can start being implemented right away. And so there's some seed money that the federal government provides through the planning grant process that helps to jumpstart that. That money would have to be matched locally. So for example, the planning funds that are available is $350,000. The jump starter money, for want of a better term, is another $900,000, and then both of those get matched locally, and that's where the city and the housing authority would jointly figure out how much could you each contribute towards that. But then later on, and this is not shown on this, after the plan is developed, the idea then is you'd be looking to try to compete for the big dollars, which is the $30 to $35 million for the implementation of the plan. Why? Why should you care? Why should the city be a part of the conversation about what the housing authority is trying to do, right? Why? Every one of these efforts, in addition to the fact that HUD requires a partnership, is that this is your city. What the housing authority is doing to redevelop its assets, these are your families too, right? And so the idea of trying to get to a win-win where the housing authority's goals and the city's goals align around a set of shared priorities is ultimately what you'd be talking about, and the planning process defines that. You work together to define what that looks like. But the idea really here is that the housing authority's assets get leveraged in a better way. If city assets are in that same neighborhood, those are also leveraged. The idea of aligning what the housing authority is doing with where the city might want to go for certain neighborhood priorities or investment, this creates a platform for doing that. The other major issue is that regardless of the timetable for how this plan might roll out, it is this idea that the future of Goldsboro requires this idea of having plans that successive administrations can embrace, even if there are tweaks along the way, right? So that there's not any accidents about how investments get made, but that there are sort of thoughtful, proactive plans that then allow for the collective impact of change in this neighborhood, right? So it's about partnership, it's about money, it's about leveraging land, but it's also about supporting families so that they have better outcomes. I said all of this already. I'm going to keep moving that one. We just threw up a couple of examples, right? So there are, right now across the country, I think, put on my glasses here, over, I think, something like 85 HUD-funded choice grantees that have done exactly what the Housing Authority is trying to do here. The idea of collaborating on a plan with a shared vision for the city. And these are just, you can slide through these here. We've put up 4 slides here, but all of these have deep Housing Authority and city partnerships. They also have a range of other partnerships around the school district as a partner. The Boys and Girls Club is a partner. The principal is a partner. The business community is a partner. The downtown business establishment is a partner. And on and on and on. This is not something that the Housing Authority can do on its own. For example, the idea of an education strategy that ensures that kids who live in public housing are on a better trajectory to succeed and are not remaining in public housing, that's one of the pillars of a plan like this, right? And so the Housing Authority is not an educator, but it has a role to play because it houses these children, right? And so having those education partners at the table, as well as philanthropic partners at the table, is ultimately what we're talking about, that there is this big table that gets set to collectively agree upon a pathway forward for some of the most vulnerable families who happen to live in public housing communities here. I'm going to stop there. And I think that is the totality of all of what the Housing Authority wanted to share with you. I think this is where we have questions now.
Anybody have any questions?
I've got one. So, when you do this for low to moderate income, is it going to be for rental units or home ownership units, or both?
So the planning process would determine that, right? So because the public housing site is a rental community, HUD would require that the existing available affordable rental be replaced. But many of the plans that have been developed over the years end up introducing home ownership as well. So that, though, depends on what the market can support and whether or not there is subsidy to help underwrite the costs for affordable home ownership, because the cost of building an affordable unit is not dissimilar to the cost of building another unit.
Right.
But yes, most of these plans end up having both.
Okay, so if it's subsidized, the Housing Authority could actually build it and sell it to people who qualify for the subsidies.
The Housing Authority can. The Housing Authority can partner with others. So whether it's bring on a private developer or partner with the Habitat for Humanity or any number of partners. But the core issue here is that the planning process is what helps to determine what is the right plan, and then backed up by a market study that says if we introduce homeownership options, they will sell, right? Because what you don't want is housing that, particularly on the for sale side, that you can't sell. And the good news is that on the implementation grant side, HUD allows for some of that grant funds to help subsidize affordable home ownership in particular.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions?
Yeah, the match funding, would that be just for one project in particular, or will it be just all together, like bundled together?
So the match funding would be for the plan. So the plan could have multiple sites in it. So let's use an example of the planning grant. The planning piece of that is $350. So you need another $350 at least. If you also go for the early start activities money, the $900,000, then a portion of that has to be matched as well. And because this is a competition, right? So the idea here is HUD is evaluating all of these applications across the country, and one of the things they look at is the depth of the partnership, and one of the measures of that is money. So to the extent that the city is able to invest and sort of share in the costs with the housing authority, that is a good indicator. Later on, when the plan is when there is a plan that's developed through the planning process, that will then lay out what that budget will look like. So if you look at, I don't know, Durham happens to be on this. This is a $500 million plan. This happens to have the city, you all probably know this, passed a bond resolution recently, and that becomes part of the city's investment in a project like this. And it may not seem like a lot, but the city earmarking funds to finance infrastructure improvement is typically where a lot of city dollars go. But the planning process, because what we don't know yet is what's the plan, right? So the first step is funding a planning effort, and then out of that planning effort comes this vision for what that site and the neighborhood looks like and what the budget is gonna look like. So that's a long answer too.
Yeah, I liked it, thank you.
You liked it? Okay, good.
Anything else? Well, thank y'all for presenting, and thank y'all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
So Mayor, the town of Chapel Hill is about 5 minutes out. They had some car problems, so they'll be here.
5 minutes out?
5 minutes out.
That's what we just said.
So as we continue with our economic development session of this retreat, I'd like to thank Mr. Dwight Bassett for traveling from the town of Chapel Hill to be here. In your workbooks on the first page, you'll see his bio, so I won't go into a lot of detail with that because it's available to you. So one of the reasons we invited Mr. Bassett to the city of Goldsboro, because the city manager wanted us to see things not as they are, but as they will be regarding economic development. So Mr. Bassett agreed graciously to come down and tell the story of, or some of the story of the city, the town of Chapel Hill. So Mr. Bassett has over 31 years experience in urban economic development. In addition to that, he has some quite an extensive background in entrepreneurship. That's vital to the success of small communities, the pursuit of small business opportunities. So just know that. So with that, I would be remiss if I didn't say congratulations on your Paul Harris Award in 15. That means in the Rotarian world that he's not only served the community, but he's a giver financially. So with that, I give you Dwight Bassett, Director of Economic Development Officer for the City of Chapel Hill. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
So I have a tendency to go fast because I always feel like council's time is so pressed. I had a closed session last night with council till 11:30. I think I've had 3 hours sleep, so I may be even more energized because of that work session. So tell you a little bit about the story of Chapel Hill Economic Development so you can get a broader picture of who we are. So first, I was hired in 2007. I've been with the town. I'm in my 14th year now. And in that first year, the city manager gave me 3 charges, and one of them was to help council craft an economic development strategy. And we did that after about a year of conversation, looking at our past history, demographics. And so in 2008, council adopted a economic development strategy back in 2008 with the primary purpose of growing the non-residential tax base and creating jobs. There are a couple other statements that help support that about community character and social justice and things of that sort, but our primary goal was to grow the commercial tax base and create jobs. So with that, in 2010, council adopted a goal, and it was actually odd that council adopted this goal. When I was hired by the city manager, he gave me 3 exercises to show my ability in the field, and one of them was to write a redevelopment strategy for a section of town that's primarily suburban, and how we might redevelop that and capture new tax income. So with that, council adopted a goal. It was originally called Ephesus Fordham. It's a crossroad of Ephesus Church Road and Fordham Boulevard. It has has had for quite some time, probably around 400,000 square foot of retail, probably around 300,000 square foot of office, and it had very limited residential, so it wasn't very mixed use. It was primarily focused on pure commercial. So as we went on in time and worked with the property owners, we decided that a crossroad name was not appropriate. We hired an ad agency and explored the name Blue Hill as a combination of Chapel Hill and Carolina Blue to reflect the district. If you want to know more, it's bluehilldistrict.com. So this is a district map. You can see Village Plaza is about 100,000 square foot shopping center, not very well anchored. It once had a grocery store that moved out. It's now a gym. The upper portion just above that has a Whole Foods anchoring it. Eastgate Crossing is anchored primarily by Trader Joe's, a Brugger's Bagel, and a Starbucks. And then across the street, Rams Plaza is anchored by a Food Line shopping center. And then everything else that's kind of filling in there is a combination of local and national chains that fill that in. So as we went forward, we created a framework plan, and this was in 2010 that we worked with the community to create this plan. And the premise was that we had not had investment in the district in about 20 years. What could we do as local government to facilitate future development in that district? And so we created this framework plan. High-level principles of the plan were to rezone the district to form-based code. In Chapel Hill, if you know our history and know our reputation, we don't have a lot of things by right. I presume most of your zoning is by right so people can go and build. So we rezoned this district to allow people just to go and build as long as they followed prescriptions of what the expectations were. We also adopted a finance plan, and the city committed to spend $10 million on road infrastructure. And we also committed to build a centralized stormwater device. The Eastgate Shopping Center is in a low point from Chapel Hill, and housing upstream from that, from the 90s, had not built stormwater devices, so all the water flowed into that area and caused it to flood. And so we're spending about $3 million to build a stormwater device that will contain that water on peak periods of rain, but it will also have a walking trail around it and serve as somewhat of a central green space for the district. So timeline, just to remind you, we adopted the small area plan a year after we began it. In 2014, we adopted new zoning based on that original plan. And from 2011 to 2014, we went through what we consider to be preliminary engineering on all the road and stormwater improvements to make sure that we had solid numbers from our financing plan once we adopted the zoning to go forward. And then in 2014, we also adopted a public investment using a synthetic TIF. If you're familiar with local government commission, and I presume at least your city staff would be, the project development financing, or TIF, in North Carolina is rather complicated, and you tend to pay a higher interest rate because it tends to be a riskier tool. So we chose to put together a synthetic TIF using town assets to pledge against the $10 million so that we got the best interest rate. In 2015, the investment began. First building was about 300 new apartment units in the district. And then in 2018, we unveiled the new brand of Blue Hill. And 2019 and continuing investments and infrastructure improvements. We are closing on the stormwater land for that device today while I am out of town hall. That was part of the conference call I was having. Last minute details from both sides. And we will begin construction probably within 45 days of closing today. So these were projections that I made, and having been in local government a long time, I don't like to be pointed to and say you are unrealistic in your projections, so I tend to take a conservative role. And so my projections, and these were 4-year increments in 3 phases. So the first phase, I projected that there'd be $131 million of investment in the district. The second phase, $28 million, and then another $100 million in the third phase. So this is one of the buildings that is coming out of the ground today as we speak. It's sort of on the northern tip of the district. You see the star on the map above, and you can see where it is located. So you look at the increase in the tax base just from 14 to 17, 3 years, and you can hardly build a building and get it occupied in 3 years typically. So to have seen almost, a little over actually, $100 million in assessed value in 3 years was pretty substantial. I don't think that's the best part of the story that you'll see in the coming slides. So on top of that assessed growth, we have about 1 million square feet, or $182 million additional dollars that will be added either this year or next budget year. And we have about another $75 million project that is coming out of the ground. We're negotiating the final details of the public road that will support that project, and it will come out of the ground within the coming months. They have their permits. So this is Fordham Boulevard Apartments. It's sort of on the lower end of the district. It is probably at its 80% completion. And it's interesting, as the first building that came out of the ground was about 300 residential units, and it's amazing, those 3 shopping centers that I pointed to originally, you can see the difference in the tenancy and the way they merchandise and the quality of the food that's offered there just based on that first round of apartments coming on. And so by the time they're all complete, we think that the whole district will begin to change dramatically because there's such a strong new demand within a walkable distance of the shopping center. So back in 17, you look at the total district tax paid, you look at the school district and the town tax, we were collecting almost $500,000 new a year in just 3 years, and that good story continues. This is Hillstone. It's behind the Rams Plaza. In the curve of the district, you can see the star on the map. And then you see where we are today. In the second year that we were running the synthetic TIF against the debt, it became cash positive, which was incredibly unusual. I want to pat myself on the back and say it was my conservative projections, but you know, it's 100% market driven, so it had nothing to do with Dwight. The good thing is you see that by the time we get to the end of next budget cycle, we will have almost $400,000 excess beyond payment of the debt for this district alone, which shows you the dramatic rise in the taxable value of the district. And we feel, again, that it was entitling the zoning, putting the public infrastructure in place to support that zoning, and letting developers follow the market demand. So this is another project. This is the last project. Well, we've got one new application that came in this week, but this one has a new road going through it, which is an extension of an existing road to create a little bit better grid in that district. And we will be paying for the road, the developer's building it on our behalf, and then building these buildings. That's probably about an $80 million investment, and it's probably over 2 phases, so about probably $45 million first phase that we'll see begin this year. So that's sort of the story of what we call the Blue Hill District. It's a pretty amazing redevelopment story. I wish I could tell you that every redevelopment turns out that well, but we understood what our market potential was, and we're really cautious as we went forward with it. And I think there's a continuing story that continues throughout the town that I thought might be helpful to share with you. I talked about adopting an economic development strategy back in 2008. At the end of 2014, council had successfully rezoned and created the opportunity for about 1 million square feet of office, close to 1 million square feet of new retail, and about 7,000 new residential units, which was pretty dramatic compared to our past growth. And then they looked at me and said, what do we do now to prepare for that? And so we decided it was time to revisit our strategy. And instead of going back with the pure economic development strategy, we decided to formulate a commercial development strategy that focused strictly on the commercial side of the market and the things that we could do as local government to enhance that. So we spent about a year having that conversation, and we came out with a vision statement of taking our place on the national map of like cities in research and development. UNC has about $1.2 billion worth of research that occurs, and we have not captured a tremendous amount of that. So our new job was to figure out how to create that commercial space that could capture that output from university research. The essence of the strategy is about jobs producing income that generates housing, that provides market for retail, which create taxes, that fund education, which provides workforce that attracts jobs that produce income, and on and on and on. It's the complete economic cycle, and that was what we tried to focus on to make sure that we were doing all the things that we needed to do to succeed in economic development. There are 3 key strategy statements as a part of this commercial development strategy. The first is town and gown relations, and we go through periods, I'm sure as you do with either your county government or any school district or higher education institute. We go through periods where we have great, strong working relations and periods where they're not as strong as we'd like them to be. So we're in a renewed period of trying to strengthen that so that we're working jointly to see benefit and capture as much of that output from the university as possible. University is now talking about innovation hub downtown. It would be as much as 118,000 square feet in our downtown just for entrepreneurs and their innovation and entrepreneurship programs. They're talking about bringing a new admissions building to downtown, and we want to believe that that's because of this fostered relationship of strengthening our town and gown relation. The second is business becomes the life of the town. If you know Chapel Hill's history, it has a history of not particularly being business friendly, and so we needed to work to change that. I've been there 13 years, and it's been a long path, and we're seeing success and fruits of that effort. But we still struggle with that occasionally. Council still makes decisions that appears to the community that we're not embracing business. But we've tried to work both from a planning and inspection standpoint to make sure we're facilitated when we have an opportunity to support business development. And the last one is telling our story. We have that past reputation that kind of overwhelms everything we do, so we have to go to a lot of trouble to tell the broader story of the success we're having in these efforts. Council has been willing to work in doing a lot of things to begin to sort of turn the ship and create a better environment for our business community. And again, we think it's paying off. So part of that is telling our story, as I just mentioned, and that requires a lot of different components. We've adopted a brand of being open to, and it's open to local food, open to beer, open to shopping, open to arts, open to education, but the ultimate is open to you and opening to doing business with you. And we've been running this campaign for about 5 years now, and we'd like to believe that storytelling is beginning to pay off. Next, we had struggled for a lot of years and had councils that considered themselves pro-economic development but struggled with an effective incentive policy. We tend to all be conservative when it comes to using tax dollars to support growth and development. And we've tried to take what I call a performance-based approach, meaning if a project doesn't perform and create new taxes, then we most likely aren't going to incent it. So any incentive I talk about means we've created new tax base that we're using to fund any incentive, and they have to perform first and then get an award second. So there is no upfront or clawbacks needed because it's performance-based. 3 projects that we've incented, a new village on the north edge of town called Caraway Village. It's about a 60-acre site that's about 900,000 square foot of entitlement, about half multifamily and half pure commercial, which includes retail, office, and hospitality. They've completed the residential and have their first 2 buildings under construction for some out parcels, a Chick-fil-A and a Target, a Chick-fil-A and a Starbucks. And we're excited to see what their next tenancy brings, and hopefully it's an anchor that will help that center grow. There was a broken road. Our Public Works Department is in the distant skyline of that picture, and we had built it back in 2008 and 9, but we never made road improvements to accommodate the problem we created by building the Public Works and Transit facility there. So when this developer came in and wanted to build, he had about $4.5 million worth of road improvements, including 4-laning the road in front of the development. And we said to him, we're willing to pay for up to $1.2 million of that improvement. That's equivalent to 30% of the background traffic that was breaking the road pre-development. But they have to perform first. They get awarded those grants based on the amount of pure commercial they build, retail, office, hospitality. When it goes on the tax base and they pay their first bill, they present that bill showing that they've paid for commercial property, and we will rebate up to 50% of that until they burn off that $1.2 million. So it's no dollars out of our operating budget. They're generating the new income, and the multifamily is also producing, but we're not touching that part of the development. So the town is getting 50% of the commercial held for future budget needs, as well as we're protecting the multifamily income for the local budget. Let me back up. I didn't finish that story. So Wegmans is on Fordham Boulevard. It's about a half mile from the interstate, and Wegmans was looking at going to Durham County or Chapel Hill. We don't have a lot of large box retailers. The tax generation from sales tax alone was sort of a gold mine for us. And when they came to us, and their development representative came to us and said, we're shopping these 2 sites. Yours is a car dealership that's probably going to have brownfield issues, and we're willing to come here, but you're going to have to incent it because we can do it cheaper across the interstate, and we're open to which direction we go. And we saw an opportunity to work with the county, and we put together a $4 million incentive package, again, 100% performance-based, number of jobs created, amount of new sales tax, and amount of net new tax base generated from the development is eligible to be pledged back to them over a 5-year period. So it's self-funding again. And then after that, all the municipalities in the county were gaining probably close to $1 million in new revenue sources in a combination of property and sales tax. So it was a pretty easy decision for both government boards to say that makes sense because it pays itself and it pays back. The last one was Glen Lennox. It's a duplex community that was built probably in the 60s in Chapel Hill, the corner of 54 and 15501 in Chapel Hill. 77 acres they wanted to redevelop, and so we went through a long planning process with them, and they came out with more entitlement commercially than they went into the conversation with. And of course, as economic development director, I'm thrilled because that meant we sort of succeeded. It was a development agreement versus a traditional rezoning, so it was a lot of council and community participation. They had the ability to build 500,000 square feet of new office. 500,000 square feet of new office on that 77 acres and about 150,000 square foot of retail. So after about 1.5 years of conversation with council wanted to only use the net new tax revenue from the office. And so if they build that 500,000 square foot of office in a 5-year period, we will rebate 100% of net new property tax off of that office, equivalent to a little over almost $2 million. So we thought that also was a win because they performed first and then we award them. So startup energy, I have run several businesses while in government. I think back when I was younger and had the energy to do that and wonder how I had the energy to do it because I look at the entrepreneurs we work with. We formed an accelerator jointly with the university and the county based in our downtown. It's about 6,500 combination co-working and accelerator. We run about 2 cohorts a year. They're equivalent of classes that people apply to and then have to go before a panel, and then the panel selects what 10 or 12 companies get to go through that cohort. They're about 4 to 5 months long, and it sends them through intense training and evaluation of their business plan so they can better understand how to accelerate their growth. We're seeing business growth come from that. We've now been doing it since 2013, and we're seeing new businesses that are staying in Chapel Hill and with employees up to 50 and 60 employees as their companies have grown. And so we believe the investment we're putting in, the town by itself is putting in about 75, the county's putting in 75, and the university's putting in a couple $100,000. And we think that we're getting real payback from fostering that startup community. You can see the investment, 113 companies have gone through, 92 remain active. They've raised $35 million to fund those ventures, and they've created 559 net new jobs. Next, we talked about our Open to Business campaign. We last fall had a very successful last fall. Carolina Donor Service, which is unfortunately just simply based in Durham, was looking for a new corporate headquarters. We recruited them. They bought a piece of land that council had rezoned in an enterprise zone, and they are locating there. They've just completed their zoning compliance and will start construction. There's 2 other sites on that particular property, and we think that's the first of 3 companies that will locate there. It's about 70 new jobs and probably about $30 million worth of new investment. We also announced a new company for our downtown, 100% startup called Well.Incorporated. It's a healthcare management firm. In other words, they sit on top of all of your health care, whether it's dental, your doctor, everything. So instead of calling Blue Cross or your doctor, you would simply call into Well, and they can help you manage your health. So it's a new model of healthcare management. They're committing, both on the state level and a local level from an incentive standpoint, to create 400 new jobs in our downtown. We think that's pretty significant. We awarded them locally $900,000, and half of that is a cash incentive, and half of it is a parking credit that they can use broken up over an 8-year period. So as they grow their employees, they sort of win awards for those parking credits and that cash incentive. I told you about Wegmans, and UNC Healthcare is currently building the first of 2 75,000 square foot buildings. They're taking some of their care off central campus so that they can expand the number of beds. And they've got about 70 acres. They're looking to build a much bigger UNC facility right at the interstate. We think that's a pretty significant win. So this is shots of the Glen Lennox. These apartments are almost complete. The office building goes right on the corner of this, and they share a deck. I mentioned the fact that we had awarded them the tax base generated off these new the office building. They're pouring the footings now, and so it will be complete hopefully later this year. This is an ad we created to reinforce that open opportunity regionally, that we're open to business and we have opportunity for businesses to locate in. This is the enterprise zone that I mentioned earlier, and if you look where it says Chapel Hill Transit, just south of there is where Carolina Donor Service, that's our enterprise zone. This is Caraway Village that I mentioned earlier. We were talking about the incentives, and then you can see the enterprise zone, conditional zoning that allows them to almost have a 90-day window from submission of plans to building beginning. Another shot of Caraway Village, which gives you a much broader context of the impact it has. We allowed them to clear part of the buffer to have a sign on the interstate so that they could attract something that would draw visitors in to exit at that location. This is our latest project. This project came about in November, and it's been exhausting. I've had about 9 closed sessions since council was sworn in on December 5th. Pretty intense. We had a tiny amount of information about what a developer proposed. There was an opportunity zone created as a part of the 2017 budget, and we applied for one of our census tracts, which creates favorable tax benefits for investors who invest in those opportunity zones, and part of our downtown is in that zone. Currently, there is a town parking deck where it says New Lab Office Building, and we're working with the developer to create a deal where the town would build a new 1,100 space parking deck. They would build a new 200,000 square foot office building, and then this 136, 137 Franklin is a building being renovated as a part of that opportunity zone. And we believe that's where UNC's Innovation Hub will go. That's also directly across from Porthole Alley, and they're talking about building their new admissions building across Porthole Alley. So we've got all these smaller projects coming together to create sort of a new wave of energy in our downtown. This project, just with the parking deck and the new office building by itself, will be about $100 million worth of investment, and so we're pretty excited about that new investment. Just basic information about who we are. I think you have this in your folder, and I'll be glad to take any questions.
Any questions?
I do.
Aaron?
We've kind of ruined the nostalgia.
You got a little bit of a challenge going on.
Yeah, see those hundreds of millions.
You might want to go up there and visit him for an hour.
We have to have something to work for.
That's right.
I got a few questions, if you don't mind. So can you describe what your economic development department looks like, how big it is, what your structure is, how many people, the budget?
From 2007 until 2018, this is the Economic Development Department.
But now you didn't do all of Chapel Hill. You just did mainly right there around downtown. Is that right?
No, I did in the entire Chapel Hill area. We have a downtown development corporation that we partner with on downtown projects in particular. And the city manager could see that he was starting to burn the candle till there was no wax left. So I got a full-time project manager, and I was thrilled with that. It's still probably not enough. We still do a lot of contract work to keep all the projects going we've got, but it's 2 employees right now.
Okay. And were you able to develop a citywide plan or just area plan so far?
Both the economic development strategy and the commercial development strategy are citywide.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Initially, did you work with planning to change the zoning rules to make it an easier transition to draw companies in?
Absolutely. They were a critical component, and so we tended to set the vision first and then brought planning on board because council was in favor of moving in that direction. Most planning departments don't initiate an easier process automatically. They sort of need a directive. We want to do whatever we can to facilitate this. And once they saw council adopt it, you know, the important part with that first plan, the Blue Hill District plan that I tell you, is not only was it a plan, because we're terrific as local governments creating small area plans, but there's always that huge missing component of a real implementation strategy for next steps. That plan had an implementation strategy, and we stuck to it through my leadership from beginning to end. So we did all the pre-engineering, we got the financing in place, and then we got planning on board, and they hired a consultant to write the new zone. But because council adopted the plan and adopted the implementation, you know, staff saw that it was a council interest to see that fulfilled.
What were some of the zoning changes that took place?
So if you go back to that Blue Hill district, there were probably 4 different zoning categories in that one district. So we rezoned all of those parcels into one unified district called form-based code. So if you meet all the stipulations in the zoning code, you could go build without a council hearing. Most of our zoning, our special use permits require going through a semi-judicial process. And because of that new code, it's no longer semi-judicial. If you meet the requirements, you get to go forward, go past go.
Crazy. That's cut out a lot of red tape.
That was the biggest. We saw that as the biggest barrier. There had literally not been any investment, probably in 30 years in this district. So it was an aging suburban shopping center that we needed to create new life in. And it's becoming, I mean, we've had our downtown businesses complain because of the success we're seeing in Blue Hill because they feel like it's stealing people away. But a community in a region like we're in, we have enough to support multiple districts of that scale, Glen Lennox, Blue Hill, downtown, and we're starting the planning on one in North Chapel Hill that's across Martin Luther King from Caraway Village. So, you know, we're trying to stay ahead of the curve and make sure we've got plenty of opportunity.
Wow. The bonds, what kind of bonds were created?
So we did installment financing. We used Town Hall as our asset to borrow against. We were lucky or unlucky. Our town hall had flooded in a really big storm. I think that was probably in 10 or 11. And so the first floor of the building became pretty much unusable, and we had to only occupy the upper stories until we renovated the building. So at that point, in talking to our finance director and going to meet with the LGC, we decided that the easier path to finance these bonds and get the most favorable interest rate was to use Town Hall, borrow money for that rehabilitation and the bonds for the district. But I mean, you know, in hindsight, you know, if we'd had the confidence that we do today, it very well could have been revenue bonds because you can justify, if you can justify showing the revenue stream forthcoming because you've got development, it's a lot easier. The new parking deck we're looking at downtown will not affect, it's about a $30 million investment, and it will not affect our capital improvements because it will be self-sustaining and will not count against our debt because it is self-sustaining revenue bonds.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, good job.
Can I see
Thank
if
you,
any,
sir.
Can I see if any of the department heads have questions? If it would be all right?
Y'all got
Anything?
any questions? No, they don't have any.
Great.
I've got one quick one. How do you get along with Carville?
I will just declare that Carborough is 1 degree cooler than Chapel Hill, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Have a safe trip home.
We'll have a public hearing to go to. All right, thank you.
I guess we got one more thing. All right, Tim, I think you're between us and
Okay, take a minute to adjust this thing. So obviously Chapel Hill sets the stage for us in this topic, economic development for the city of Goldsboro. You know, we have our goal for a strong and diverse economy, but what are we doing citywide to look at economic development? So I'm going to start with what you've done successfully downtown. You can take a look at the vision, beautiful, historic, lively, and full of economic opportunity and gusto. We honor our past while developing diversity and vibrancy, cultural arts, entertainment, urban lifestyle. You've done that. I mean, the picture shows it. So y'all made it happen. It's just not these people in this picture. It's just not Downtown Goldsboro Development Corporation or the Downtown Development Department. It's the council members sitting around this table. It's the citizens that participate, and it's the citizen tax dollar. This is the way we're currently organized. Under the city manager, we have a downtown development department, which consists of approved positions for a director full-time, a property and business development manager, as well as a marketing manager and a part-time office assistant. They get budget funds from the general fund and the municipal service district. And then we partner with the DGDC, which is a nonprofit separate organization that has a 25-member board and over 50 members. The executive committee makes the decisions. There are 7 people, and they raise their own budget. They have multiple committees that are very effective. These organizations haven't developed overnight. They've been around for a long time. Since 1977, you had the Municipal Service District. In 1980, you had the DGDC. In 1984, you had the Main Street Community and the Downtown Development Department in 1993. That organization does a lot of stuff. All these things for marketing. Take a quick look. I'm not going to run through them, but you can imagine the manpower it takes to make that happen. They do a lot of events. I don't even want to count them up. Some of which have gone away, or at least been replaced by, for instance, North Carolina Freedom Fest for the Poultry Fest, Wings of Wayne, combination there. I don't recall what the Tipsy Turkey was, but all these other things are being done. 36 DGDC committee meetings supported by the Downtown Development Department. And here's what they've accomplished. What this slide shows you over the last 6 years, buildings renovated 147, jobs created 326. Let's see, net businesses gained 53. 24 million in economic development. That's 9 million from the city, 15 million from the state and federal agencies, and then 20+ million from private investment. And we just added another 12 million for 6 buildings downtown with Patrick Riley, and you've got a potential another 12 million more coming. The funds that make that happen, from your general fund, you spend about $420,000 per year, $280,000 on your staff, another $72,000 roughly for consulting, and $68,000 in operations. Your nonprofit organizations raising $150,000 a year and spending $60,000 on events, $25,000 on projects, and $25,000 on other operations. And your municipal service district is budgeted for $92,000, but we expect that to be over $100,000 this year for beautification projects, improvements, operations, etc. This is the size of your municipal service district. You know what's been done downtown, but you know you don't have to go very far off the center street, and you've got a lot more work to be done. Downtown Development Department and DGC goals remain basically the same. Protect and enhance downtown's assets, expand the market footprint, promote quality of life, turn uninhabitable buildings into quality spaces, raise and support quality businesses, make downtown development family friendly, and increase residential density downtown. 2019 and 2020 Downtown Development Department objectives, 4 of the 6 that are listed here have been achieved. You've maintained the historic preservation tax credit. That didn't happen without a lot of work and coordination. They've delivered the rehab development project that I previously talked about for 70,000 square feet of space, secured private sector investment, secured microbreweries downtown, and they will deliver another successful Tiger project. And we're trying to identify uses for Union Station. This is their ongoing work effort. You can see all the things. You know what's been talked about in the past. It's a significant amount of work. So the question is, what do we do going forward? The Downtown Development Department could be downsized. Whoops. We have, our director has moved on, and we have an interim director in place. Do we just stay with that interim director, or do we hire another director and another market manager? Do we keep it the same? In other words, maintain Downtown Development Department? Do we grow into Goldsboro Economic Development Department? Potentially bigger return on investment? Possibly do the same with the DGDC to bring them along to whatever degree they choose to as a nonprofit organization. The cons, that'll likely cost more money. and could potentially distract from what's going on in the municipal service district. So a model I came up with to look at this, I would call this more of a networked organization than a matrix organization where people report to two different people. But if you were to create a Goldsboro Economic Development Department and hire somebody specifically like that, like Mr. Bassett, it could be himself. It could include potentially your business specialist that's from the Downtown Development Department, and leave the Downtown Development Department with a director and a marketing and an assistant. So in the end, you would have one more person there, and they would coordinate very closely with community relations and development, plans, travel and tourism, as well as these external organizations. So what I'm asking, excuse me, is what your opinion is on this. Do you have any druthers the way forward? Because we will have to advertise for the positions accordingly. We definitely need to, excuse me. Make a decision on what we're going to do with downtown development, but we could wait to the next budget cycle to determine what you want to do for a citywide economic development officer, whether we can afford to fund that and you want to do that. So I turn it over to you, sir, and council.
Anybody got any comments, thoughts, opinions?
I'm not prepared to offer any yes or no at this point in time because we're just seeing it for the first time.
Do you need any more information that you know of, or you just need time?
I think I need to, myself, I need to understand a little more in depth what the organization as displayed here is about, the personalities, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I guess my thing is you're saying whoever the GED person is TNT, plans, DDD, are they all going to work for this person?
No, that person would report direct to me just like everyone else.
Report to who?
Me.
Who would report to them? Nobody?
No one's reporting to Mr. Bassett, for example, right? But he's coordinating with these other departments. So,
And so that's all that person would do right now?
yes.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions?
I think one thing we do is to kind of, as we've all said, that we want to move out from the downtown some into some of the other areas, whether it be North End, whether it be Little Washington. And we get that formalized a little more, and then we've got time to decide what we're going to do here. So I basically like
Why don't we try to have some plan formulated by budget time? Would that make sense? I mean,
Yes.
That gives us time to, we can have a few smaller meetings on it, or talk about it, or let council think more about it, and then we can maybe in the new budget figure out if we want to do anything or not do anything.
Okay.
Is that good with everybody?
Yeah, I also have a question. And also how he had the different locations. Could we get a radius of what would entail the downtown area per se? Like, for example, he had a north end, a south end of all. Of
Downtown itself?
But I mean.
No, he's talking more
what I'm
of
saying is
Goldsboro.
streets wise, as far as perimeter of ground zero being how far out, like I said, north end, parts of Mulberry that extend the post office past, what streets would the perimeters?
kind of out from the MSD.
Right. I don't see any streets.
Well, I think overall that it's not a bad idea what you're proposing. I think we need somebody that has the expertise to draw companies here, to give us ideas on rezoning, development. So I welcome that idea. What I would like to see, in the meantime, before we make a decision, if we can do a study pertaining to rezoning, so we can fast track companies when they get here, opposed to it coming, all the red tape. So we can try to figure out how we can rezone. We can do some studies pertaining to the bonds that are, that we can put in place to do some things as well.
Okay.
I like that idea. I like that one just now, straight
All right.
All right, thank you, sir.
Anything else?
Just
Can
business over to you, if you had anything for Ron.
Yeah, does anybody have anything for Melissa? Or Tammy, any further action items that we hadn't talked about? All right, is everybody good? Yes. All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you for coming.